On October 14th, 2019, I interviewed Steve Pankey, a person of interest in the 1984 disappearance and murder of Jonelle Matthews. In October 2020, Steve was officially charged with Jonelle's death. And just within the last few days, Steve's trial started. Today we revisit that original 2019 interview. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. As many of you know, in less than a week, I will be testifying in Steve Pankey's trial. If you know that, you also know that I've been tight-lipped about the talk I had with the DA's office in early September. Because of this, I will be offering no commentary or insight after this interview plays. In fact, between now and my time in the courtroom, I will not be following the trial even though it is being live-streamed on YouTube. Instead, after the interview plays, I will go through how Steve came to be on the program on October 14th, 2019, and I will leave it at that. Anything else I have to say will not be aired until after my time in Greeley, Colorado is completed. Thank you for understanding. Unfound News. I gotta say, my presentations at Northwestern State University this past Tuesday were a huge success. Everything, including the technology I brought with me, went perfectly. A huge thanks to Michelle Holcomb, who made the appearance possible, and to her and everyone else who also made myself and my brother feel so welcomed in their college community. Next, on October 20th, 2021, next Wednesday, I'll be flying to Greeley, Colorado to testify in the Steve Pankey trial. I will return to Florida on Saturday, October 23rd. What does this mean for next Friday's episode? I don't know right at this point. I will keep you posted. Finally, the next presentation date on my schedule is November 4th, at Nova Southeastern University in Davie, Florida. Before that, though, Dr. Telesco and I will be getting together for another YouTube show on October 28th. We will discuss the disappearance of Jason Landry, where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Pandora, Audible, Podomatic, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Deezer, and YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us for the Unfound Live Show on the Unfound Podcast Channel. Watch, listen, and become a subscriber. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week, I need to thank Brett. You can also contribute at PayPal, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. I also need to give a huge shout out to all the people who have monetarily contributed using Super Chat during the live show on YouTube on Wednesday nights. Thank you for watching, and thank you for donating. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Yes, you know it. Don't forget the reviews. Shirts at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com, or you can track down my assistant Heather in the Facebook group. Playing cards at makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound Podcast. The website, theunfoundpodcast.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. A note before the interview starts. I apologize for the poor quality of the audio of this interview with Steve. The problem was two issues put together. Number one, Google the previous week in October 2019 had sent an update to all Android phones that disabled their call recording apps. So I had to come up with a way to record Steve on the fly. And number two, Steve just doesn't talk that loud. He's a very soft-spoken guy. I did the best with what I had, and I have to admit that it's ironic that the most well-known interview I've done has some of the worst audio I've ever had. I'm happy to have on this special edition of Unfound a person who we might call a person of interest. Of course, you, the listeners, will determine whether that makes any sense or not. His name is Steve Pankey, and he's being investigated for the disappearance and now murder of Jonelle Matthews. Steve, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, and I'm sure the listeners know that this is a unique kind of interview that I'm doing, but you had contacted me, and I felt I had an obligation as a journalist to answer the call to interview you. You, of course, found the program somehow. I guess you thought that I would treat you fairly, and you have my word that I'm going to do that in this interview. In the end, it will be up to the listeners to determine whether you're telling the truth or not. So let's just start here. Just give the listeners a little bit about your background, your education, where you've lived, relationship, work, and of course, I think many people know that you ran for a political office a few years ago, but just give them a little bit about who you are, what makes Steve Pankey Steve Pankey.
I graduated from La Puente Alternative High School with a GED. It's La Puente, California. I graduated from Ames Community College in Greeley, Colorado with an associate's degree with a minor in criminal justice. I lived in Greeley, Colorado from 1973 through the end of about 1986. I first had a love relationship with a man named John Zopp for many years. I was married to my wife Angela for 23 years from 1979 to 2001. We had two sons, Mark and Carl. Mark is my best friend, and Carl was murdered on the 4th of July in 2008 by his ex-girlfriend. I was an apprentice mortician in California. I was apprentice mortician in Idaho. I was a youth pastor in Colorado. I was a used car dealer in Colorado, and most of my life in Idaho. I've been in Idaho since 1989, and I've been a property manager, property rental owner most of the time. In 2014, in 2018, I ran for governor. First I was the Constitution Party candidate, and then in the primary, I was kicked out in 2018 in the Republican primary for Idaho governor.
Okay. Now, I know that you have done some other interviews before this one, maybe some TV interviews with video, maybe some just audio ones too. And in those, I know that some criminal charges, not to say that you were actually convicted or anything, did come up. I think that's on the record now. I'm sure the listeners would like to hear a little bit more about that, being that we are doing this interview concerning a young woman, a girl who disappeared and then was murdered. What did some of these allegations against you, what were some of those allegations going, I guess, back to the 1970s?
I want to make absolutely sure that everyone understands at no time have I ever been accused of any crime dealing with anybody under the age of 18. I just want to state that up front.
All right.
In 1968 in California, I was 17, and I was laying in the grass kissing another 17-year-old boy, and we were arrested on some misdemeanor charge. He had marijuana on him, I didn't, and that was my very first arrest. In 1970, my family has always been divided over my family's long history of homosexuality, and it's always been divided over that. And there was a family argument which ended in a fight, and I was charged with something like misdemeanor battery. It was dropped. I was not the instigator in that. In Colorado in 1977, I was a youth pastor at Sunnyview, the now defunct Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. I was 26. I was dating a woman who was also active in the church. She was 23 years old, and she became pregnant, my child, and she and her mother went to England, had an abortion, came back, we had sex again. She told me that she confirmed to me that she did get an abortion. I was upset and threatened to tell the church. I was next formally accused of date rape. Back in 1977, polygraphs were like real important back then. I took a polygraph, passed it, and under 1977 standards, she was asked to. She declined. The charge was dropped. I was charged with exactly 20 misdemeanors in Colorado. I can't remember all of them now what they were, but I did count 20 at one time. They ended up in 3 jury trials. In all 3 jury trials, I won, and they were all won within 45 minutes. I like to say Colorado police were short on relevant facts and long on judicial abuse. I consider myself, I am not a judicial virgin, and I am a judicial abuse survivor. I want to also add here that the Matthews family, this is all over, there are like 79,000 Google things related to me, so it would be near impossible for anybody to dig all of them. But and the Matthews family was interviewed after the memorial service in August of 2019, and they said they were interviewed by police, and they said that was the absolute first time they had ever heard the name Steve Pankey.
Okay. I think I do need, being that you were, I think you're going to have to probably give myself, because I'm not familiar with them, but I'm sure the listeners maybe not aren't either. How do misdemeanors end up in jury trials? What were the, I guess, the flavor of these misdemeanors, and can you give maybe like a time span in which they all occurred?
One of the misdemeanors happened before Jonelle Matthews disappeared, before I talked to the FBI, and that one was in regards to driving 60 some odd miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone.
Okay.
Now, back then, you're talking 35, 37 years ago. Back then, you could have a jury trial for any ticket. This was way back then.
Okay.
And especially being a misdemeanor, all misdemeanors you could have a jury trial for. And then I feel like I was extra harassed by police after I had talked to the FBI regarding the Jonelle Matthews case. And my aunt accused me of phone harassments. There were 5 charges to the family. They were rolled into one jury trial. And in my view, my aunt and and the police stories got bigger each time they told them, and I won that. The last Colorado trial I had, which was the last thing, which would have been like late 1985,
Okay.
was a homosexual friend of mine ran a credit union. He was the president of the credit union, and he accused me of harassing him, and that went to a jury trial. And again, I won within 45 minutes of going to the jury.
Okay. Being that you were acquitted or found not guilty in these charges, have you ever been convicted of anything? Anything that I'm perfectly willing to accept you were innocent in all of these things, but is there anything that somebody charged against you that you were then found guilty? Anything, pay a fine, community service, maybe even jail time, anything like that?
Yes. In Idaho in 1997, I was at a bank in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I had an upper hiatical hernia, and I accidentally vomited in the bank. There were 2 bank employees behind the counter. I was charged with 2 counts of disturbing the peace, and it went to a jury trial, and I was convicted on both of them. In 2018, my Idaho attorney got those, because I've never been charged with anything since, got those dismissed.
Okay, so you were eventually, even though you were convicted that those were, I don't know, expunged from your record or something. I'm not a legal scholar either, so those things that happened in Idaho in the 90s, it was eventually expunged from your record then? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you for being transparent regarding that. The listeners should know I have not had a chance to look up Steve's record. Maybe some of you will do that. But I appreciate you bringing up all those things. It does sound like a lot of things, a lot of charges, but nothing in which you did any jail time or anything like that.
No, in the 1997 Idaho, the disturbing the peace, I spent 10 days in jail.
Wow, for disturbing the peace. Okay, that's 10 days. That surprises me. That doesn't sound, throwing up in a bank doesn't sound serious enough to spend time in jail, but okay. All right, that's a little surprising to me, but...
Well, I know that's surprising to you.
Mm-hmm.
In December of 1996, John Benet Ramsey made international news with dying in her house in Boulder, Colorado. That drew attention back to the Jonelle Matthews case, because they were both Colorado, they were both young girls, they were both Christmas time. And it caused police to want to interview me again, and I refused to talk to them. And so I think that is what caused, I think the one of the two tellers was related to, her husband was a police officer. And so I think there was what I would call quid pro quo there.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's my feeling.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to guess at least a few people now listening to this interview are not familiar with Jonelle Matthews, the entire case, and I really do not want to go through every fact in technical detail regarding that. But let's just go over the general facts. Of course, you've known about her disappearance, whether you were involved in it or not. You've known about it for 35 years. We'll get into the names and things in a little bit, but what are the general facts of her disappearance?
Jonelle Matthews on December 20th, 1984, in the evening time, was on TV in a choir group singing before for a nursing home, and after that, a man named Russell Ross and his daughter was a friend of Jonelle's, also singing. They took Jonelle home. When they got to her house, nobody was home. The garage door was halfway open. They watched Jonelle go into the house. They were the last known people to see 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews. Her father came home roughly an hour later. Jonelle wasn't there. He made phone calls to people, friends of Jonelle's, to see where she was. Approximately a half an hour later, her stepsister, Jennifer, who was 16 at the time, came home from a basketball game that she had participated in. And roughly half an hour after that, Mr. Matthews, the stepfather of Jonelle's, called his pastor, which was Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, Pastor, I forget his name now, and the pastor said, if you can't find her, nobody knows where she is. Call the police right now.
Mm-hmm.
Called the police, and she was not seen again until her body was found July 23rd, 18 miles south of her home, which would have been in rural LaSalle, Colorado.
Okay.
A few days after that, there was a memorial service. Her skeletal remains were buried.
Okay.
That takes us, I think, answers your question.
Right, and we're surely going to talk about how her remains were discovered a little later. But there were some, once again, I'm not an expert on this disappearance. You've known about this for 35 years. I think that over the course of my life, I'm 49, I think I've heard about her disappearance, but of course it's never been something that we've covered on this program. But just in reading news accounts, going to newspapers.com, my understanding is that, like you said, that the garage door was open when she was dropped off. The TV was on inside. In addition, there were footprints. It was like there was snow, there were footprints. Do you remember some of these things as being true at the time?
Yes.
Okay. And once again, being that you've been living with this for 35 years, once again, whether you were involved or not, is it the understanding then that these footprints, for example, were of a man's footprint and not a woman's footprint? Has that ever been revealed to your knowledge?
I have no knowledge. It hasn't been revealed to my knowledge.
Okay. And then I've also read that there is proof that Jonelle was dropped off because she was home and somebody called the house regarding her father's work or something. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And it had something to do with he was a principal and This was a person who wasn't going to be able to be there the next day or something like that, and she was looking.
It was a teacher who wasn't going to be there the next day.
Right. Okay. So there is verification that she was in the house after she got dropped off. Maybe she was alone. Maybe somebody was with her, but she was at home, and she was dropped off. That's all I'm trying to establish. Okay. Thank you. All right. And then she disappears, and like you said, just this summer, her remains were found, and we will get into that in a little bit. When was the first time you heard Jonelle Matthews' name?
The first time I heard her name it would have been on December 26th, 1984, 6 days after the fact. My wife and I and our 5-year-old son, Mark, were returning from a trip in California back to Colorado, and we would have probably been in southern Colorado.
Okay.
At the time, it was reported that a 13-year-old girl was missing, but she was actually 12.
Okay. So you heard about this on your way back from this trip that you took, and we'll get into that trip in a little bit. But that's the first time that in your life, and I don't know how, think I know how old you are now, but I can't do the math, how old you were at the time. But that was the first time in your...
33.
33, thank you. That was the first time in your life that you had ever heard Jonelle Matthews' name.
That's correct.
Okay. This is the part where I have to ask these questions. And once again, the listeners should understand that Steve was given an interview outline. He's being treated like every other guest that has ever been on Unfound. I thought that was fair. He knows a lot of these questions are going to be coming to him. I wanted to make sure that he was prepared for this interview. It is up to him how he wants to answer the questions. But, Steve, this is probably where maybe a few of these more difficult questions start because I have to ask them as a journalist. Did you know Jonelle? Did you know Jonelle or her family at all? At all?
Not at all.
Nada. Okay. Did you ever have any interactions with them in Greeley, Colorado by accident? And I even have some examples in the outline. Through church, through work, softball league, bowling, anything. Ever. Family, her parents, her, I know I guess she has a sister, anything.
Not at all. I mean, nada. I mean, none.
Okay.
Now, let me qualify that.
Okay.
Greeley was a town of roughly 60,000 in 1984.
Okay.
So, could I have passed one of the Matthews in a grocery store? Sure.
Okay.
But no, there was no conscience knowing any of them, and according to them, until August of 2019, they had never heard of me. So,
okay. And
mutual thing.
Okay, thank you. And I think you said that your son that you had at the time that went on this trip, he was quite a bit younger than Jonelle, so it wasn't like they went to school together or anything.
No.
Okay.
He was in kindergarten. He
Right.
was homeschooled.
Okay, thank you. And what about your wife? I'm not saying we have to mention her name at all for the context of this interview, but would your wife have had any interactions, once again, to your knowledge, I'm not saying you were following her every second of her life while you were married, but to your knowledge, did your wife ever have any interaction with anybody in the Matthews family? Would she have known where they lived? Anything, once again, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, my then wife had no interaction with anybody in the Matthews family.
Okay. Did you, I know I brought up the church already. Did your family and their family go to the same church?
Before I was married, a year before the Matthews family moved to Colorado, when they were still in California,
Mm-hmm.
I was a youth pastor at Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. Obviously, when you're a youth pastor and you're charged with date rape, you're you're not wanted in that church anymore. You're out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was out of there a year before they came, and then they went to Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene.
Okay. And this date rape had to do with what you've already talked about, going back to the 1970s, with this woman who went
1977.
with the woman who went to England, got an abortion, then came back, and then accused you of date rape.
Right.
Okay. And the church, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, but the church somehow found out about that?
Found out about
The date rape?
date rape?
Yes.
The date rape was on the front page of the newspaper. Everybody knew about
Okay. Okay. All right. We will certainly come back to that later. So, I have to ask, do you think it then is a coincidence that you were working at this church? Then, of course, you were let go for these prior allegations. Of course, you were not convicted of them. And then they went to that church. You believe that to be a coincidence?
Yes.
Okay. Is that I have to ask, I've never been to Greeley, Colorado. Is that a big church? Big congregation? I know it's not, I guess it's defunct now, but at the time, big church, small church?
I'm guessing 300 people, including children and all.
Okay. On a typical Sunday back then, how many people do you think they got at a service?
Well, I would say Sunday morning, 300. I'd say Sunday night, 150.
Pretty big.
I'd say 80 on Wednesday night.
Okay. Pretty big. Okay, thank you. All right. So you left the year before that, and then they move in and they start going to the same church. I'm guessing then, being that you were let go, you and your family were not welcome at that church anymore. Is that how that worked out, or did you leave religion behind, or what if I can ask?
Where we were living in 1984, I went to the Pentecostal church across the street, Faith Ministries.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, I'm guessing now, or at some point after she disappeared, you found out where the Matthews live. Once again, you're claiming you never knew them, didn't know anything about them. Once again, that'll be for the listeners to decide. But once you did find out where the Matthews lived, did you live close to them, a mile away, 5 miles away? Did you even know that until it became, of course, public news?
I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know that they existed, or Jonelle. I didn't know Jonelle existed or disappeared. I didn't know her family.
Mm-hmm.
After the fact, after it all came out in the news and all, I figured which people who have gone on Google, who are far more techie than I am, it's roughly 2 miles away.
Okay.
From my house, where I was living, from where they lived.
Okay. And at the time, late 1984, is there any reason that you would have, when you did find out, is there any reason that you would have ever been near the Matthews house for business? Was there a restaurant in that area? Anything that you might have even driven by their house during the time that you lived in Greeley, Colorado?
No. Where I lived on 10th Street, I lived like a half a mile outside of the Greeley city limits in the county, and I lived on a main drag. Where they lived was a residential neighborhood that was off of the beaten path. There was no grocery stores, there was no anything in that neighborhood. I mean, there's just nothing of any interest unless you live there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you had no business in there. Do you have any family friends? Your wife and you had another couple that even lived near the Matthews on the same street, a block away, 2 blocks away, anything like that?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about that day of December 20th, 1984, from your perspective. What did you, of course, if anybody's looked into this case, they know about this trip that you eventually took, but what went on for you the day of December 20th, 1984?
I was watching for the mail because I was getting 2 credit cards in the mail from my dad, and they did come, and it would have been around 1 p.m. when I got those. So from 1 p.m. on, anything that would not freeze, my wife and I were packing in the car to be ready to go early 4 or 5 o'clock the next morning.
Okay. And was this a trip that you had prepared like for a couple weeks in advance, a month in advance? Was this like maybe like a family? I realized that you had been gone like over Christmas. Is this something you did every year as a family tradition, or how would you explain this trip to the listeners?
It was not a usual thing. I'm guessing, I'm going back 35 years, and I'm guessing it was planned 2 weeks in advance, but it might have been 11 days, it might have been 7, it might have been 3 weeks. I don't know.
Okay.
My paternal grandmother and my maternal grandfather were still living, and both of them were in very bad health. And my parents hadn't spent much time with our little boy because he was born in Colorado, and they lived at Big Bear Lake, California. And so my dad was willing to pay the credit card for us to get to and from Greeley to Big Bear Lake, California.
Okay.
And part of what he was saying is the older folks, my grandparents, this may very well be their last Christmas. And
Sure.
So for those reasons, we were going.
Okay. So maybe it was a couple weeks in advance. It wasn't like, I guess what I'm saying, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. It wasn't like you decided on December 19th that you were going to leave on the 21st. This was something that was planned.
It was planned.
Okay, thank you. And you, once again, I just have to ask this. Being that we know the approximate time that Jonelle disappeared, it's a very small window of an hour, which you may not realize this, but in my world, a window of an hour is a very small time for a person to disappear. I wish we had more cases like that because those ones are more likely to get solved. But for the hour that Jonelle, in that hour that she disappeared, before she was dropped off, before her father came home, once again, approximately an hour, and that's what the public accounts state, would your wife be able to account for you for that hour on December 20th, 1984?
She has been my ex-wife since 2001, and I talked to her several months ago about it, and she just doesn't remember that night at all.
Okay. What about you? What do you remember? Do you remember being at home for that time?
I was at home. There was no reason for me to be anyplace else.
Okay. All right. So you're packing the car. Did you own one car, 2 cars?
We had one car. It was a white 1984 Toyota Corolla 2-door.
Okay. And you were packing that up, preparing for this trip the next day. Okay. And you believe... Please.
Let me throw another thing in there. I had at the time, and it was going to soon expire, but I had a used car dealer license, and this was the only car, and I mean the only car I had left. And so I had a dealer plate, and I was going to be the very next day crossing several state lines with a car on a dealer plate, which is illegal, which would put the car subject to confiscation. I had a wife and a 5-year-old child. So whether I was in Greeley or whether I was crossing state lines or coming back or whatever, I wanted to watch my P's and Q's. I didn't want to do anything that would draw attention to me because I was doing
right,
lesser criminal charge.
right. And the last thing you want is to get your car seized while you're going on a trip with your wife and your son. Okay. All right. But just for December 20th, you never, once again, you were packing, never left the house around the time that Jonelle disappeared.
No, I had no reason to. I didn't know who Jonelle was.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking you. I realize it's been 35 years, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but what you're stating is that for that hour, you were at home when Jonelle disappeared from her house 2 miles away.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then, as you already said, it was during your trip back from this trip that you found out about this girl, Jonelle Matthews. You heard it, and that's when you first heard about her disappearance. Is that correct?
Yes. That was the first time I had knowledge that she existed and that she disappeared.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have to tell you, I'm going to be honest with you, Steve, and I'm always going to be honest with you. This is where it starts, in my opinion, maybe the listeners, it starts to get a little unusual, and I've covered 150 disappearance cases, but I'm just going to let you explain it for yourself. So you get back, on the way back, you hear about Jonelle Matthews being missing, and on the very next day, December 27th, 1984, you have this conversation with your father-in-law. Please set it up. Where did it happen? At your place, at his place, over the phone? Did he initiate it? You know, I think you're really going to have to go deep into this conversation that you have with father-in-law, because I think it is kind of maybe, once again, whether you are responsible or not, has kind of set the tone for the last 35 years. Please say everything that you can about this conversation you had with your father-in-law, the mother of your wife.
Okay. I was back home at my house, 6086 West 10th Street, Greeley, Colorado, with my wife and 5-year-old son. We went to bed when we got home. It was late. It was 35 years ago. I don't remember what time we got there, but it was late. We took the boy inside, put him to bed. We took the things that would freeze out of the car and them inside. We were exhausted. We went to bed. We did not set the clock for the next morning, so we just got up when we damn well felt like it. And I was outside making loads to come inside. I'm guessing, and this is a guess, I'm guessing at 10:30 in the morning on the 27th, which had been exactly 1 week after the fact that the Matthews girl had disappeared.
Okay.
So I'm getting stuff out of the car through Cliff Sharp's driveway. Cliff Sharp I owned 1 acre. Cliff Sharp owned 4.5 acres directly to the east of me towards Greeley. And there was a back driveway. He had roughly 35 unrunning cars, and it looked like a wrecking yard. And he had a shop where he worked on cars, and there was through the other side of his house, the far side of his house, there was a long driveway that was kept open and kept plowed. and people who knew me, or because I was good friends with Cliff, and people who knew me and were familiar with my place could come in that way instead of coming in straight into my driveway. And my father-in-law parked somewhere there. It had been approximately 2 years. Now, it might have been 3 years. It might have been 18 months, but approximately 2 years since I'd seen my father-in-law.
Wow.
And he came up and approached me outside the house by the car. And I was surprised to see him. My first thought is, you know, before we weren't talking, his only grandchild was my son Mark, and so it was Christmas time, and so I was thinking that he was wanting to make amends. This was just an assumption on my part.
Okay.
It's just an assumption.
All right.
So I'm talking to him, I'm listening to him, but I'm also getting stuff out of the car. And he had I am an INFJ personality. Do you know what that is?
I know the Myers-Briggs test. Yes, I am an INTP, so I know exactly what that is. Yes.
Okay. So keeping that in mind, my father-in-law put his right hand on my left shoulder when I was reaching for stuff in the car. He wasn't a feely type of guy. And so I stood up straight. I looked at him. He had what I would call a concerned look on his face. And so I stared at him. And you have to keep in mind that this is roughly 35 years ago. So so it's recall.
Okay.
He said that a cop came to the cemetery and talked to him, had a body that needed to be buried, something about a casket, putting it in a casket, and that it would look bad for Steve.
Meaning you. This cop said this to your father-in-law, and this is now what he's telling you on the morning of December 27th.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, I'm standing there. I don't know. It was probably below freezing outside, and I'm looking at him, and to me, this was like the weirdest conversation I'd ever had in my life.
I'm sure.
This was like totally, and I mean totally, out of character for my father-in-law. And I mean totally out of character for him to say something like this. My perspective, the only way I see life, the only way I see any circumstances are through the lenses of an INFJ. That's what I am. That's who I am. And it was, I can't describe in words the look on his face, but it seemed the best way I can describe it in human words is gravely concerned.
Okay.
I was thrown off guard, so I shot off my mouth with the first thing that came to my mind, and I said, "Are you wearing a police wire?" He said, "No," looked down, turned around, and walked away. Now, that was the last time I had a conversation with him in my lifetime. He died of natural causes roughly 15 years ago, probably closer to 20 years ago. Now, I want to clearly state, he didn't mention that the body was a man, a woman. He didn't mention Jonelle Matthews.
Okay.
In my head, in my INFJ head, I knew that last night on the radio it talked about a 13-year-old girl missing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes.
And being somebody who is not a judicial virgin, somebody who has been through the system.
Okay.
I am not a lawyer, but I know that there is a criminal standard where you have direct knowledge, but then there is also a lesser criminal standard that is also serious that you should have known, okay? So I didn't have knowledge of known. I didn't ask questions of known to obtain known, but I felt, and again, I'm a guy with a GED for a high school diploma. I'm a guy with a minor in criminal justice, and I saw that as a good indication of a good possibility of a should have known. What I did is I got all of this stuff from the car.
Allow me to jump in. I'm going to allow you to continue. I just think that I need to fill in a few blanks here. Why is it that you hadn't talked to your father-in-law for 2 years if he is your wife's father? Why was that you didn't talk to each other for 2 years? If you can sum it up quickly.
He felt that my wife and I owed him money for when we first got married in 1979. We bought a trailer that had been burnt out, and he paid for materials to fix it. We felt we paid him back. He felt that we didn't. My wife had roughly 3 years before this had some dental work done, and my father-in-law's wife, my wife's stepmother, paid for those dental bills, and he was royally pissed over that. That caused an argument.
Okay. So when you say that you hadn't had any conversation with him for 2 years, is it then and once again, I understand you weren't following your wife for every second. Is it then your understanding, your belief that your wife also did not have any correspondence or communication with her father for those 2 years, or what do you think?
Yes.
Okay, so she was like you. Okay. Once again, I understand that you weren't following every conversation where she went and everything, but your belief is that for those 2 years that you didn't speak to him, she didn't speak to him either.
Correct.
Okay, and then out of nowhere, he shows up, he parks in this back lot or whatever it was, and he shows up in your driveway telling you about the cops have asked him to bury a body. Out of nowhere.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
As I'm hearing you're saying that, I'm thinking this is weird as all get out.
Mm-hmm. It is, but I wasn't there. So I'm just trying to. All I'm doing is trying to sum it up, in a concise way, and I'm just making sure that that's what you just told me. Okay, and just so everybody's clear on this.
That's what I just told you.
Okay.
I think that there's an old saying that truth is stranger than
Fiction. Okay.
Believe me, I would not make this up just to make this up.
I don't know. Being that he is deceased, I do not know how we could prove or disprove the. If you're willing to tell the story, I'm willing to listen. I'm just trying to get the particulars of it because it is strange, and I'm just trying to add a little context to it. Because really what is out there now is there's just this statement that he made to you. Well, I want to know, when was the last time you talked to him? What kind of relationship did he have? Those things. I think it's important to put that statement in context, and I'm glad you've done that. Thank you. I do have to ask, after this happened, did you go inside and say, you know what, your father was just here and told me this crazy story? Did you and her talk about that conversation?
No. After I got the car unloaded, I went next door to Cliff Sharp's place, and I got a newspaper. I got a newspaper from him. He subscribed to the Greeley Tribune, the local paper. I did not. And it was one of, over the last week, I don't know exactly which day it was.
Okay.
But I skimmed through there, and as I remembered it, there was nothing in the paper about a murder, but it was all over the paper about this missing girl.
Okay.
Jonelle Matthews.
All right. And if I may just follow up on that, and what you said just a few minutes ago is that you knew about Jonelle Matthews being missing at the time. Your father-in-law shows up the next morning, and somehow in like your subconscious or something, although he didn't bring up her name, he didn't even bring up if it was a man or a woman, boy or girl, you kind of had a suspicion that this is the person he was talking about, Jonelle Matthews, even though he didn't say it.
Yes, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so, and maybe this is an important question too, and I have this. Would he be a guy that somebody would go to? And I don't mean illegally, but was he in the business of digging graves at the cemetery or something? Was that his job or what?
He was, yes. I think his title was head groundskeeper. Depending on the time of year, he had 2 or 3 guys under him, under his direction. They dug graves. They planted bodies. They, mowed the lawns. They took care of the grass.
All right. So if anybody, once again, legally, people who die of natural causes, if they were going to a particular cemetery, and I've experienced this because my mother died not quite a year ago, but these are the people who take care of a cemetery. He would be one of those people who then would be out there, I don't know, with a backhoe or something, digging a hole that a body or casket would go in. That was his job.
Yes.
Okay. So it would seem that then that would make sense. I'm not saying he was involved in any illegal activity, but if somebody needs a hole to be dug for a body, that he knows what that is. It's not like he's an accountant. I guess that's what I'm saying. He has the equipment. Right. He has the equipment to do something like that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Under a legal term, he would have the opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so you go over there, you're putting kind of 2 and 2 together, you go over, you see the newspaper, you see all this stuff about Jonelle Matthews, but I have to come back to this. Is there a reason that you didn't just go right inside and tell your wife, or maybe she wasn't home, but at least the next time you saw her, is there a reason that you didn't say to her, you're not going to believe, your father showed up here today, and this is what he told me? That never happened.
That never happened. And the reason it never happened is my marriage was never good from the beginning. And I had a 5-year-old child. I did not want to be in a situation to where I got a divorce. I didn't want to be the first person in my immediate family to go through a divorce. I didn't want to have a custody fight over my precious 5-year-old son. And I'm going to just flat tell you the truth. whether your listeners like it or not,
Okay.
in my value system, I value the life of a living child over the possible murdered child or possible dead child, and the possible dead child was not in my custody, was not in my charge. The 5-year-old living child was in my custody, was in my child, and I will put then or today his interest over that of a possible missing dead person.
Okay, but still, you never, once again, never, not even once, 10 years, I can't add up all the math here now, but I know you continued to be married after this. At no time, I guess she knows about it now, being that it's all public news, but while you two were married, the discussion of him coming to your house that name never came up. You never brought it up.
That discussion has never happened to this day.
Okay.
It never happened in 1984 and every subsequent year to this day.
Okay.
It's never.
All right. And is it your then understanding, once again, I know that you would not know your wife's every move, but is it then your understanding that your father-in-law never said anything to her about this conversation that he had with this cop that went over her? Being that you never said anything to her, is it possible maybe she had a conversation and never said anything to you?
That would be beyond my knowledge. I
Okay.
seriously doubt it, but I personally seriously doubt it.
Okay.
But that would be beyond my knowledge.
Okay. So you just didn't feel, just to keep this, I'm trying to keep this simple, you just didn't tell her because you didn't feel like it, or you didn't want to worry her? I know what you said about your child, but I have to believe, I mean, there are a lot of pro-life, and I'm not here to get into politics. I understand what you're saying, but I think even a lot of people who are pro-life, they would have gone back inside with their wife and said, even no matter if you were on shaky terms, it is her father anyway, that you would say, you are not going to disbelieve, did you know your father was here, and here's what he told me. I have to say, you know.
Let me answer that, and it may not satisfy you, and it may not satisfy your listeners, but it's just plain the truth.
Okay.
One of the characteristics of INFJs is that they don't like conflict. I did not want to be putting in a position to where dishes would be thrown, things would be thrown at the house, being cursed at, and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't want to go there.
Do you really think that's how she would have reacted? I mean, you didn't. I mean, I don't know your wife. Okay, it's not probably none of my business. But I'm thinking, if you are innocent, I think that she would be pretty pissed that her father would say something like that to you. She wouldn't be mad at you. She might be mad at him. Maybe she'd go over to his house and throw dishes.
You could be right, but I don't think so.
Okay.
The bottom line is we can hit this from 100 different ways. The bottom line is from December 27th, 1984 through the recording today, I've never had that conversation with my then wife.
Okay. And then I know that you said he died approximately 15 to 20 years ago. Did you ever have any conversation with him the rest of his life?
No.
And how far, I got to ask, how far away did he live in Greeley? Did he have a Greeley address? I mean, this must have been something that was pretty bitter, Steve.
He lived approximately 2 miles away to the south in a mobile home park. And,
okay.
Never had in really late 1986, we moved from there to, where did we go? Oh, we went to her real mother's place when she was pregnant with Carl, the boy who was murdered later.
Mm-hmm.
And that was late 1986. We went to South Texas, and it's my understanding that Harold and his wife, that's my father-in-law and his wife, they moved to either Iowa or Missouri, somewhere around in there, around that period of time.
Okay. And just maybe I need to just sum it up this way. When he died, I don't think maybe you were then married at that time. Do you know if your wife / ex-wife went to his funeral when he died?
There was no funeral. He didn't want a funeral.
Okay.
He wanted to be cremated, and he wanted his ashes destroyed.
Okay. All right. And that's some people want it. In fact, that's how my father wants it. Okay, so that's not an unusual request. Okay. So you never talked to him again. It sounds like there were bitter things going on before Jonelle Matthews ever disappeared. It does, as many things happen in his family, it sounds like it had to do with money and other things. You didn't talk to your wife about it. You moved away, they moved away, and she didn't have any contact with her father. You didn't have any contact with anybody. I do have to ask this. I realize you had problems with your father-in-law. Do you think he would be the type of guy to take part in a crime of disposing of a body for somebody who wanted it disposed? Does he sound like that type of guy?
No, absolutely not. Wouldn't not do it.
Okay.
Just flat, not him.
Okay. So then, once again, the way you read this, and you've had a lot of time to think about this, 35 years, do you think that he actually assisted in disposing of the body? No?
No.
No.
She was found 18 miles from Greeley in a rural area around LaSalle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he wanted to dispose, he had a backhoe. He could double stack her in a casket. He had a backhoe at the cemetery.
Right.
He had, I mean,
okay.
Why would he risk? I guess what I'm saying is when you look at it, why would he risk going 18 miles away to put a body when he had, it would be normal. Nobody would suspect him of doing anything, digging with the backhoe at the largest cemetery in Greeley.
I think that's a very good point. I think that's a very strong point, Steve. I guess I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just trying to give a different point of view. I think the other thing, though, is if whoever did kill Jonelle, and if they were looking for somebody to dispose of her body, those kinds of people only usually go to somebody that either is going to say yes and help them or is going to say no and keep their mouth shut. You know what I mean? Because that's a very, you start to introduce conspirators to a murder, loose lips sink ships. And that's why I have to ask you. But in your opinion, even though you had beefs with him, you do not believe he would be the type of guy that would have done something like this. Whether she was found 18 miles away or even in his own cemetery, you do not believe that your father-in-law would do something like that.
Absolutely not. He and I didn't get along, but he would never have done anything like that.
Okay. All right. Just plain out, do you believe that this conversation that your father-in-law had with this person in law enforcement, and once again, we'll get into that eventually. We've got a long way to go, listeners. Do you believe that this conversation actually took place? When he came to you, do you believe he was telling you the truth?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So he tells you that, and I'm going to guess that it was on your... Please.
Can I interject something here?
Please, go ahead. It's your interview.
Okay. You and your listeners never met Harold Hicks, okay? he was a guy who had just very few friends, and he was very close to them. He played cards with them. He didn't gossip. He was not somebody who would gossip. He didn't talk about his business. He didn't talk about anybody else's business. This was somebody who characterized, he was a man of the soil. He grew up on a farm. This was a guy who just didn't fib. He didn't do anything. He may have goofy eyes on certain things, on politics and other things, but he wasn't somebody who would make up something like that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to guess this weighed on your mind because eventually, maybe a week later, moving into early 1985, maybe you even know the exact date, you finally did go. Did you go to the Greeley Police or maybe in the sheriff's office? I know the FBI comes in here at some point, but at some point, because of that conversation, you did go to law enforcement. Tell the listeners what brought you to do that and who you talked to and how that went.
Can I tell you about on the 27th, the day my father-in-law talked to me calling my attorney?
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. After I went to Cliff Sharps, after I skimmed over the newspaper, I called my attorney. His name was Don Genklo. He's still living. He's still practicing law in Colorado. And he has commented to at least one reporter that was reported on the news favorably about me during that. But I called his office. I talked to his secretary, whose name was Cy, C-Y, and I said, Cy, this is Steve Pankey. I need to talk to Don right away. And she said, well, Steve, Don's in Israel, and he won't be back until next week. So I waited till the following week, and if I remember right, I looked it up on online calendar, but I think it would have been the next week, like the first day he would have been there, which would have been January 3rd, and or January 2nd. I called him and got him on the phone, and I said, I had a very strange conversation regarding a body, and I'm wondering if it's about the missing girl, and I don't know what to do. It got real quiet. There was a long pause between me stop talking and him talking, and he said what I would be concerned about would be obstruction of justice. Now, I owed him quite a bit of money at that time, so I thanked him. I got off the phone, and I thought about it for an hour. If you understand INFJ personality types, we overthink everything. About an hour later, I called the Fort Collins because I didn't like the local police, and I thought if a cop contacted my father-in-law, it would probably be either somebody in the county or the city. So I contacted the Fort Collins FBI, and I was interested in avoiding an obstruction of justice charge. I called the FBI, talked to an Agent Lyons, and I said, I want to talk to you. I want to make a formal statement to you. It may or may not have something to do with the missing girl here in Greeley, but I want to avoid an obstruction of justice charge. He said that he would call me back later and tell me where we'd meet the next day. He called me back later, and he said we'd meet at the Greeley Police Department.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel about that, being that you were trying to avoid them?
Well, I had made it clear to him that I was willing to talk to him. I had two feelings about the Greeley Police Department. One is I was leery of going into the Greeley Police Department. However, on the other hand, looking at it from a legal point of view, if later on the Greeley Police Department wanted to charge me with obstruction of justice for me coming to their cop shop and talking to an FBI agent there, they had to know what the FBI agent was talking about. So on the one hand, I was leery of going in there. On the other hand, I was thinking, it would make it doubly hard to later charge me with obstruction of justice if, I didn't have a crystal ball. I would assume that this all is going to get solved later on or in the near future. And if it came up that my father-in-law had talked to me, and if I didn't say something, I could get in trouble. So going there had two purposes, or I guess it had one purpose, but it would make it harder to charge me with obstruction of justice.
Okay. So you met the FBI agent, this Lyons, at the Greeley Police Department. How'd it go?
It went remarkably well. We met there. He was very unlike the Greeley police. He looked at me intently, listened to me intently, let me talk, say whatever I wanted to say, never got in my face, heard me out, and when I got done talking, he said to me, because I had said to him that, I had this conversation, and when I got done talking, he again was looking at me as he was asking me questions, but he asked me if the conversation dealt with anyone like Jonelle's older friends. And my answer was, I didn't know Jonelle, I didn't know her older friends, so no, it didn't have anything to do with that. He asked me if the conversation dealt with any drug dealing in the neighborhood where Jonelle lived, and I said, sir, I don't know anything about that neighborhood. I didn't know Jonelle. I didn't know the people in that neighborhood. I don't know anything about that. His next question, and to the best of my 35-year memory, the last question did the conversation have to do with anything of anyone who didn't like Jonelle? And I said, I just basically repeated again, I didn't know the neighborhood, I didn't know Jonelle, I didn't know the people, I didn't know the people who liked her, I didn't know the people who didn't like her. I didn't know any of that. And so he said, wait here, and he went into the hall. Now, I didn't remember this, but I haven't mentioned this on previous interviews because I just now remembered it, and it's accurate remembrance. But I could hear an argument in the hall between him and somebody else who turned out to be the detective that came in, because it was the same voice, the detective that came in and talked to me later, but about, that they needed to talk to me too, and Lyons kept saying, you'll get your chance, you'll get your chance. At the time, I assumed that argument was just on show for my benefit, because I had made it so clear to Lyons that I didn't want to talk to the Greeley police.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a good cop, bad cop type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
all right.
So Lyons came back in the room and just said, Steve, you have to talk to the detective. He went out, the detective came in, and the detective didn't start out tough or anything like that. He was like, what's your story? And I just basically said, I don't have a good relationship with the Greeley Police Department. I don't want to talk to you. And I talked to Special Agent Lyons. You can talk to him and get what I said. And he let me go. Okay. I mean, it was.
Okay. Let me, if I could jump. All right, so that was the conversation. How did the FBI agent react when you told him it was your father-in-law, and your father-in-law was essentially implicating a police officer, I guess, in the Greeley Police Department? Maybe it was a police officer from somebody else, but from somewhere else. But the way you remember the conversation with your father-in-law is that he was asked by somebody in law enforcement to get rid of a body, and it was going to look bad for you. That is what you told the FBI agent.
Yes, I don't think I said Harold Hicks or any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I did give him the outline of it.
But what I'm asking is, you did, in your statement to the FBI officer, you did say that somebody told you that the police officer wanted somebody to get rid of a body.
Yes.
Okay. And how did the FBI agent react to you? Do you remember his reaction at all?
He was very poker-faced. He was looking at me intently.
Mm-hmm.
I think poker face sums it up. He wasn't giving any reaction away.
Okay. So I guess maybe you didn't use your father-in-law's name, Harold Hicks, but did you make it clear to the FBI agent, this Lyons guy, that it was your father-in-law who said this to you?
I definitely said I had the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I said it was somebody I knew. I can't say for sure either way. Okay.
Can you think of any reason why you wouldn't have mentioned your father-in-law?
No.
Okay. Because once again, it doesn't seem like you guys had a great relationship anyway. If there was ever an opportunity to, and it seems to me that, once again, I've never been interviewed by an FBI agent, but it seems to me if you come forward with a story like that, the FBI agent's going to say, you know what, you're going to have to give me a little more on that. Who is this person? Did the FBI agent ever ask you that? Once again,
no.
Never asked you that.
No, but he did ask me the questions that I related to you regarding younger people.
Mm-hmm. but I got to say, it seems weird to me he wasn't interested in knowing who told you this story.
I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it went. Now, I forgot to tell you, and this is true, I had told them that I had told Agent Lyons when I talked to him on the phone the day before, that I'd talked to my attorney, Don Janklow.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started out the conversation with him that I had talked to my attorney, Don Janklow, and if it gets tough in here, I'm going to lawyer up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that has any effect on his reaction at all, but you and I are in total agreement. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised at how easy that whole thing went. I thought it was easy with both the FBI agent Lyons, and I don't remember the detective's name. I remember what he looked like, but I don't remember his name. But it was also easy with the detective.
Okay.
Now, I think you and your listeners could certainly understand when my father-in-law mentioned a cop, and I had a bad relationship with the Greeley Police Department, that I wasn't really wanting to talk to a Greeley detective anything on this.
Mm-hmm. But once again, during this conversation, you never brought up it was your father-in-law who said this to you, and you never mentioned his name. And the FBI, in turn, once again, the way you remember it, the FBI never asked you that either.
I don't remember if I did or didn't. I don't remember.
Okay. It seemed, once again, I've never been interviewed by the FBI, but it would seem to me that would make sense. That his name or his relation to you would come up. It seems like that would make sense.
I'm guessing it probably did, but
Okay. I wasn't there. I'm just asking. I'm just asking the things that I think make sense. And
to be transparent, I don't remember for sure.
Okay. Did you ever tell? Did you once again? I know you married for several years after this. Did your wife ever know that you talked to the FBI about Jonelle Matthews' disappearance at the time at all? She did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I had told her on the day I talked to Lyons on the phone that I was going to go in to talk to the FBI at the Greeley Police Department the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I said that to her I had two reasons for saying that to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's if she had any knowledge of this, it would give her an opportunity to bring it up to me. And if I went into the Greeley Police Department and I was arrested for any reason, she would know where I last went. Okay.
But did she know that you were going to talk to them about Jonelle Matthews?
No.
Okay.
She knew that I had been in trouble quite a bit, and
Okay.
she knew that. I mean,
I guess all I'm trying to determine is, being that you didn't tell her that your father-in-law came over and mentioned about this body and everything, the only reason you're going to the FBI is because of that conversation. You wouldn't have been going to the FBI without that conversation, right?
right.
Okay.
Right.
So being that you did go to the FBI and you told her that you were going to the FBI, she had to be thinking, why are you going to talk to the FBI or the Greeley Police Department at all?
You would have to know her. You would have to know our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It would. If she had any knowledge, I was giving her a chance to tell it to me by asking that question, if she did have any knowledge, which I don't think she did. I think.
When you say, I just want to be specific, any knowledge regarding Jonelle Matthews' disappearance?
Right.
Okay.
So when I told her I was going to be talking to the FBI the next day, my feeling is where she was at that point in our marriage, at that point in her life, it was probably, okay, whatever, I really don't want to know. I think that would have been her attitude. She didn't say that, but I think that's kind of where she was at.
And would you say the reason is because in the years before Jonelle disappeared, you had run-ins with the law, and maybe your wife kind of knew the way it went anyway, being these 20 misdemeanors, etc., that you've already mentioned?
You said that very eloquently.
Okay. All right. Okay, so you go in there, you have these conversations, the FBI, maybe this would help clear some of this up. To your knowledge, once again, I know you never talked to him again, but I have to ask, do you know if the Greeley Police Department or the FBI ever talked to your father-in-law about that conversation that he had with you, about Jonelle Matthews, anything, to your knowledge?
I have no knowledge either way.
All right, so you don't know, even if you did mention him, you don't know if they actually followed up with him or not.
I have no idea.
Okay, thank you. All right, at any time while you, and I have this in the notes, got to ask it, at any time while you were talking to them that day in early 1985, do you think that they were eyeing you as a suspect in Jonelle's disappearance?
Yes, I think they saw. I don't think the FBI agent did.
Okay.
I think the Greeley detective in the Greeley Police Department. There's no doubt in my mind that the detective talked to other people in there after I was there regarding me.
Okay.
And I think that they always saw me in the most sinister light.
Okay, but I know what's going on now. But when you went in there in early 1985, when you went in there, and I know you were avoiding the Greeley Police Department for reasons, the misdemeanors and everything else. Once again, on that day though, in 1985, did you walk away thinking anybody in that building suspected you of Jonelle's disappearance? Did they give you any impression, like, we know you did it, why don't you just, anything like that?
No.
Okay.
I went out of there kind of legally high, really happy. I slept really good that night for the first time in a long time, because by I wanted to believe what the FBI agent, the questions he was asking me. I was then thinking this was older kids on a younger kid, and kids crack quickly, and especially if there was more than one involved, and this would all be exposed. So at that point, when I left the Greeley Police Department, I was thinking, whatever my father-in-law said to me, why he said it, had nothing to do with anything, because what FBI agent was talking to me about, and again, I'm an INFJ, he was intent in his questions to me, and they were all dealing with older kids. So they weren't dealing with anything other than that.
Okay. So being that
I felt really good.
Okay, so the FBI gave the impression that, if she's missing, it had something to do with teenagers or drugs or something. So then how did you look at this? Did you think then, looking back at what your father-in-law said to you, do you think he was just pulling your chain? Being that what he said and what the FBI agent said were two totally different situations, did you think that, here goes this father-in-law of mine, that's SOB, trying to get me worried about nothing? What'd you think?
I was perplexed. I'll just put it that way. I was perplexed regarding my father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
I was relieved by what FBI agent said to me.
Okay.
So that's the way I put it.
Okay.
I never thought my SOB
Mm-hmm.
father-in-law, because I just can't make this clear enough. What he said to me was totally out of character for him.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a vindictive person. He wasn't somebody. He had disagreements with me and with my wife, but he wasn't vindictive. He wasn't doing anything to us. He was no longer talking to us
Right.
over money. He wasn't suing us. He wasn't bad-mouthing us. He wasn't spreading it to other family members. He just wasn't talking to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. This wasn't a person. What he said to me was just out of character for him. I wouldn't call. I mean, he wasn't Mother Teresa, but if somebody told you that Mother Teresa had said what my father-in-law said, you would say, what?
Mm-hmm.
Because it just wouldn't be her, okay?
Okay.
That may be a dumb example, but this wasn't a vindictive man. This wasn't a man who wanted to get you.
Mm-hmm. Well, so once again, I have to ask, being that once again, between there was definitely a dichotomy between what the FBI said and he said. Once again, did you think that he was losing his mind? Do you think that somebody was pulling a prank on him? What'd you think? If it was so out of his character, then it had to have, for a minute you had to think, what the hell was going on here? And did you ever come to a conclusion?
I did think, what the hell's going on here? I was perplexed. I didn't know what to think beyond that.
Okay. All right. So you go to the FBI, you walk away, you slip the best you have in a long time. And how does the rest of the 1985 onward go? And I just have some questions here in the outline. How did your life go after this? Did you think of Jonelle's case often? Did you keep tabs on the progress? Did you ever talk, of course we know you didn't talk to your father-in-law. We know you didn't talk to your wife about it. But did you talk to anybody about Jonelle Matthews' case? And how did that go for the next... let's try to, tighten this up a little bit. The next 10, 15 years, what went on regarding you and Jonelle Matthews' case, and your relation to it?
Well, let me narrow it down to just through the time between 1985 and we left Colorado.
Okay.
I had 2 jury trials, at least 7 misdemeanor charges. They were either dropped or I won them in court. I felt I was being harassed by the police. I would look in the paper. In 1985, I didn't have a cell phone, no internet, no nothing. It was just the local paper, and this was a big deal in Greeley, and so if there was any news on it, it would be in the local paper. I really don't remember any news on it in the local paper. I kept thinking to myself, if this is kids on a kid, why in the hell can't even the Greeley Police Department figure this out? So that's what I was thinking. Late 1986, my wife was pregnant with our second child. I felt, you have to keep in mind, there's somebody that's killed a kid, or there's somebody that's taken a kid. You can assume by, say, 1986, late 1986, 2 years later when my wife is pregnant, if the kid has never been heard from again, the kid's probably dead. So there's somebody out there who's done this to kids, so I didn't feel overly safe with my kids there. There were times when with Mark, our oldest, I was probably overly cautious with them. So when Angie was going to have, was pregnant with the second child, I wanted to move away, and we were thinking of warmer climate. So her real mother was in South Texas. So we went down there. So part of it was, if the stupid police can't figure out who actually did this, we'll go down there. And so, with now a second child, I didn't want to have every year 5 misdemeanor charges against me and all that stuff. So for a variety of reasons, we went to South Texas. And then from there, let me see, we went to, I think, Oklahoma, and then Carl, our son Carl, was born at City of Faith, Oral Roberts Hospital in Oklahoma, and we wanted Christians to deliver our second child and be in a Christian environment. And then through our landlord, we moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and then we did a lot of moving in those years. Then we moved to Big Bear Lake, California, to be near my folks. Then we went to Portland, Oregon, and I was going to formally go to mortuary school there, and that never worked out. And when we were there, that would have been like 1988.
Wow.
I called Cliff Sharp, who was our former next door neighbor in Greeley, and we just talking stuff. And then at some point in the conversation, I brought up that girl that disappeared, when we were living next door. Did they ever solve that? And he said, I don't believe so. And so I thought, I guess over the years, at first, when I had the conversation with Lyons, his questions, I wanted to believe that it was kids on kids. And over the years, when it wasn't solved, it became more and more, what the intensity of my father-in-law, the look in his face, his eyes, what he said, and all, became more and more important. In 1989, we moved to Idaho, and I went to work for a mortuary. And I joined, this is big-time Mormon country here, and when they said families are forever, that was like really neat to me because I'd never had a good marriage. So I joined the Mormon church, and when I got my priesthood, when I was baptized, got my priesthood, the bishop asked me if I had anything that was on my chest bothering me, anything I wanted to confess and all. And I said I was bothered by this 12-year-old girl who disappeared from Greeley, Colorado, and I had this weird conversation about it, and I was just bothered that it wasn't resolved. And he talked to the stake president, who then contacted me, and it was like to him, if you've got knowledge on a missing person, we want you to talk to this fellow Mormon who's Lieutenant Mark Lockwood with the Sun Valley Police Department. So I talked to him about it, and in our first conversation, he was kind of like lions. He just kind of sat there and heard me out and didn't have, a whole lot to say. About a week later, he called me and wanted me to come in. And he had this huge file, it was probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 8-10 inches thick. And he said that it was copies of the Jonelle Matthews file. And he took a hardline approach to me, and he was saying either one or two things happened. Either I'm crazy, I want attention, and I made up the whole thing about the conversation with, the conversation about it, and I just wanted attention. Or I really did it, and I was brought up the conversation to interject myself in the case. And I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about here? I had a conversation. I related that to the FBI. And
if I could just jump in here for a second. So when you talked to that bishop and you said you were being bothered by this girl, Jonelle Matthews, who disappeared in Greeley, Colorado in late 1984, you were not admitting to this bishop that you were bothered by it because you committed that crime.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I was bothered by it because I had a conversation that happened in the time period that I've already related.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Right. That's what bothered me.
Okay.
So, that's what bothered me.
Okay. And do you remember, once again, I know you don't specifically remember when you talked to the FBI agent, but when you talked to the bishop, do you think then, and I know this is some years later, maybe 5-6 years later, do you think that you mentioned to this bishop or even to this police officer in Idaho that it was your father-in-law who relayed this story to you? Did his name or his title come up then?
I probably said a relative.
Okay. All right, so you talk to the bishop, you talk to this cop. He either thinks you're crazy or you're guilty. And where did you go from there? I don't want to break this down to every month, but just over the next few years, I mean, did anybody follow up with you? Did you look at yourself as, did Greeley contact you thinking you were a suspect or anything like that, or what?
No. Greeley never contacted me. I was contacted by 2 FBI agents, showed up at my door in, I'm guessing early January 1997, and they were on the John Benet Ramsey thing. They were doing and they said that I had talked to an FBI agent regarding Jonelle Matthews in 1984, and I said that's correct. And they wanted to talk to me about it, and I basically told them that I would only talk to them with an attorney because I'd had a conversation with Lieutenant Mark Lockwood with the Sun Valley Police Department, and he was calling me either crazy, wanting attention, or I did it, and if that's the way some in law enforcement saw it, the only way I talk is with an attorney. As I remember, they each left, the FBI guys each left me their cards. I did not keep their cards. I don't remember their names because it was just at the front door. Then I was stopped by Mark Lockwood several times, like driving down the road, because I owned a property management business in Ketchum, Sun Valley area, and would, like, he didn't write me a ticket, but he'd want to talk to me about the case. I would tell him only in front of an attorney, and that would be the end of that. Then I went through, my wife filed for divorce in 2001. I moved to Shoshone, and in Shoshone, I wrote, by then I had a computer, and by then I was on the internet, and I wrote maybe a half a dozen between 2010 and 2014 letters to the Will County District Attorney's Office inquiring about the case because I wondered. Then my last maybe one or two letters were returned unopened. So I thought, screw them. If they don't want to hear from me, why should I,
Right.
I was interested in the case. So from 2014 until April 8th, 20, from 2014 to April 8th, 2019, when Detective Cash called my sister-in-law, there was like a 5-year gap in there that there was no contact.
Let me just go back to when those two FBI agents showed up at your house, wherever you were living. They were asking about John Benet Ramsey. Are we then to infer that you were viewed as a person of interest maybe in her murder? Is that why they were there?
John Benet Ramsey?
Yes.
No.
Oh.
No. They had said, well, I don't know that, but I had assumed by what they said is they knew that I had talked to an agent about Jonelle Matthews some years before, and it was a similar thing, a similar time period, and they were, I took it they were looking for connections, like maybe whoever did Jonelle Matthews might have done John Benet Ramsey.
Okay.
I don't know that. But that's kind of what I thought.
Okay, and once again, though, because of the situation, I know how this is viewed, but I'm going to say it anyway. You lawyered up. When they started answering questions, you said, I'm only going to answer if my lawyer's here.
Yes.
Okay. And it was because of the prior problem you had, even in, of course, we know about the things in Greeley, but even there in Sun Valley, Idaho, you had an issue with a cop there who was trying to pin Jonelle Matthews, once again, at the time, disappearance on you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's move up to the present, to this year. So you got divorced in 2001. You got remarried at some point?
Never did.
Oh, you never got remarried. I apologize. Okay. So now we go up to this year, and April 8th, you've already talked about it. April 8th, 2019. What happened on that day? I know you've already talked, but let's get a little bit more of the details. What happened?
I got a call from my brother in Arizona, and he said a Greeley Colorado detective named Robert Cash had called his house, talked to his wife, my sister-in-law, and said that he had this case of this missing Jonelle Matthews, and Steve Pankey's name is all over it. Is Steve crazy? And that my sister-in-law said, what? And she handed the phone to my brother. Detective Cash said the same thing to my brother. My brother said, Steve isn't crazy. He doesn't have mental problems. He's definitely eccentric. He is an eccentric person, but he's not crazy. And my brother is an ex-San Bernardino deputy sheriff. And so then my brother called me, related the conversation. I looked up on the website the Greeley Police Department. I called there. I asked for Detective Cash. I got his voicemail. I left a voicemail for him stating that please don't contact my relatives. In 1946, my uncle was a homosexual killed in police custody. And my family has been deeply divided over the years of my homosexual past, and please don't contact my relatives. And I kind of left it at that. About an hour later, I got a call from a different phone number in Greeley, and then it hung up right after I answered it. I called that number back, and the young lady answered Will County District Attorney's Office. Will County is the county. Greeley is the seat county, or seat city in Will County. And then I hung up on her. Then a couple minutes later, I got a call back from that same district attorney's number, and it was Detective Cash. I could tell that I was on speakerphone. I could tell that I could kind of hear like papers being passed, and like other people were in the room, and he wanted to talk to me about the Jonelle Matthews case. He said that, I knew Russ Ross very well. He wanted to talk to me about Russ Ross. I knew because I'd been a youth pastor at Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. He wanted me to talk to me about them. He over and over and over said, you are not a suspect. You're not a person of interest. I'm not going to read you your rights. I just want to talk to you. I want to come there to Twin Falls, Idaho, and talk to you. And I said, well, the only way you're going to talk to me is with my attorney present. And he said, that's fine. Will you talk to me? And I said, I will do whatever my attorney says. If you're paying attorney, you might as well take their advice. So I will do whatever my attorney says. And I said, I want to end this conversation. I want to talk to him. He asked me, what did you say to FBI agent Lyons? And I said, talk to FBI agent Lyons. And he asked me a few more questions. I don't remember exactly what they were. He again asked me if, he again was stating, you're not a suspect, you're not a person of interest, I'm not going to read your rights, I just want to talk to you. come to Twin Falls and talk to you in person. And he again asked me for the second time, what did you specifically say to FBI agent Lyons? And I, like, you know, you want to know what I said to Lyons? Ask Lyons. You guys called me a liar in the past. You charge me with date rape. You charge me with 20 misdemeanors. You're scary people. I don't want to talk to you. And then he said, before I let you go, he said, you know, if somebody chopped up Jonelle's body, but they didn't kill her, it's past the statute of limitations, and I wouldn't like it, but there's nothing that could be done. There could be no criminal charges filed.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I flat am not going to talk to you anymore. I didn't do anything of the sort, and I hung up the phone. Then.
So just to be clear, out of nowhere they call you on April 8th of this year, 2019, but we know that her body wasn't discovered until a couple months later.
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay. All right, so you have this conversation on April 8th. What happens next?
The same day, Cash called my attorney in Twin Falls, Idaho, and then they started an email thing back and forth, and my attorney wanted some ground rules, and one of those ground rules is that there would be, because there had been bad blood in the past, there would be two things. One, I'd be given total immunity. Number two, I couldn't be charged with lying to police, like if what I said didn't match with what I said 35 years ago or something like that, you know.
Okay.
Because of memory and all of that stuff.
Okay.
And then it was back and forth, and in the end, Cash never. There was no conversation. There was no agreement done. So my attorney said, you know, Steve has told law enforcement all he knows, so therefore there's no reason to talk to him. Therefore, he will not be available to you. Then my attorney got a call from Keith Rourke, who is the Weld County District Attorney. Everybody's seen him on TV because of the Chris Watts case, which made international news, you know,
yes,
prior to that. So Keith Rourke called my attorney, and he said rather abruptly to my attorney, anybody who needs a deal had involvement and there will be no deals. And my attorney said, well, then we've got nothing to talk about, and put the phone down. And so that was, I don't know, that was, I think that was in late July after her body was found. I think that's when that was.
Okay. Well, let's keep this timeline straight then. Being that conversation happened after she was found. Remember, once again, the way I look at it, there's not a lot of going on. Nobody's talking to you about Jonelle's case at all. Of course, maybe you have a run-in, back in 1990. The FBI shows up in 1997, but it's about John Benet Ramsey, not necessarily about Jonelle Matthews, on and on and on. And then out of nowhere in April, they're trying to reach you, and then coincidentally, conveniently, I don't know what to call it, a couple months later, her body is found outside of Greeley, Colorado. Do you remember where you were when you found out that her remains had been found?
I was at home. I did a weekly internet search on the case because I had been contacted by Detective Cash,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden there's this stuff that her body was found, and I guess I was here at home. I guess my first reaction was, what the F? It was a little surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And and I was greatly relieved at the area that she was found in, because that would obviously have nothing to do with me and all. My personal view, and, I can't prove this, but my personal view is I think the Greeley police knew where her body was all along, or most of the 35 years, if not all the 35 years. And I think that they knew that there was a gas and oil thing was there, and there was digging around there. I don't think they knew which day, but I think they knew sooner or later her body was going to be found.
That's a pretty serious allegation, Steve. I'm not, in my experience, 10% of the cases that Unfound is covered. Police officers are involved, but that is a serious allegation. But I want to come back to that.
Did you say 10%?
10% of the disappearance that I cover, at least 10%, a police officer is seen as a suspect in the disappearances I've covered from my program. That's 150 cases, so at least 15 of them. 15.
That blows me away.
That's true. I'm not making that up. I could almost name them right off the top of my head.
No, I'm sure you're telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that at times police officers would involve, but that's a much higher percentage than I would have thought of.
Well, I could give you the list after we're done, but that's true. But but even what you're saying is a very serious allegation but I do want to come back to that because the listeners are going to find out you do have some other reasons. We have to put that in context. But yes, you said that I think earlier in this conversation that you said she was found 18 miles maybe away from where you lived at the time, something like that. Okay. And you said obviously you would have no connection to that area. Well, none of us know you, so please explain this area to the listeners and why you would have no connection to that area.
Well,
and I guess we have to think about it in 1984 terms, not 2019 terms, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. There's Greeley, Colorado. Right south of Greeley is a smaller city called Evans that I'm guessing was a population of 8,000 people at the time. Then south of there is LaSalle, which was a very rural town. I'm guessing 3,000 to 5,000 population in '84. That's arbitrary. Don't hold me to that, but somewhere around there. And they're saying east of there. Now, east of there would have just been like farmland, vacant land. In 1984, there was just nothing there. I guess there were, I'm assuming there were dirt roads out there and all of that stuff, but it was just...
Nothing.
Unless you worked in agriculture, I don't think you would have any reason to be out there.
All right. So you're stating for the record that you'd never been to that area. Back at that time, you had no reason to be in that area. You were not familiar with that area. Nothing.
Correct. All of the above.
Okay. All right. So whether the police knew she was there or not, but somehow they're digging pipe out there. They're putting in some pipe or something like that. And I've even done some satellite views to see what was going on out there. And they run across her remains, and you find out about it. And I have to ask you this. When her remains were found, did you automatically think back to that your father-in-law's conversation from 1984, even though we now know that he dug real graves for a living, not ones out in the middle of nowhere to cover up bodies? But did you think of that conversation?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any way I wouldn't have thought of that conversation.
Okay. All right. And is it then your interpretation? I know what the public reports have said, but maybe maybe some more inside information than the rest of us do. Was Jonelle buried? And do you happen to know how deep she was buried? Was it a foot? Was it 10 feet? Have you ever heard anything about that?
I don't know any of that.
Okay. All right, thank you. So this happens then after that is when you had this, your attorney had another conversation in which he said, no, we're not going to be taking part in the discussion. You said that happened sometime in July 2019, which is, of course, only a few months ago. Where did everything progress from there? Because I know at some point you got served with a search warrant, and I guess they came up to Idaho, and how did that all happen?
On August 15th, on August 15th, Detective Cash and Detective Prill from the Greeley Police Department showed up unannounced at my door. I live in a condo association that's got 28 units in it, and my condo is in a building with 8 units, and there's a front door. You can't get inside. You have to either know the code or you pick up the phone and you talk to the unit to get buzzed in. And about 10:30 in the morning on August 15th, I was watching a Christian, it was actually American Center for Law and Justice, a Christian news program on the internet, and my phone buzzes, so I answer it, and this voice says, "Steve Pankey?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Detective Cash." I said, "Are you at my front door?" And he said, "Yes." And I asked who. I said, "Who all is with you?" And he said, "Detective Prill from the Greeley Police Department." And I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "You're not a suspect. You're not a person of interest. I'm not going to read your rights. I just want to talk to you and a video interview talking to you." And I said, "Well, you were told by my attorney that I wouldn't be talking to you, so you need to call my attorney." And he said, "Well, would you go to your attorney's office and talk to us there now?" And I said, "Well, I'm sure he's busy." And so I said, "I'll call my attorney." So I got off, I hung up that phone, got on my cell phone, got my attorney on the phone, told him, and he said, "Tell him to contact me and not talk to you." So I said, "Will you tell him that?" So I went downstairs out the front door, and they were in the courtyard area, and I said, I handed the phone to Cash, and Cash tells my attorney, he says, what law says I can't talk to whoever I want to talk to? And then he hands the phone back to me, and then Detective Prill, who's standing there. Now, Cash is looking at me like intently, like he's checking me out, like he's studying me. And Prill gets right in my face, says he needs to talk to me. And it's kind of like a nose-to-nose, good cop, bad cop, like this intimidating kind of thing. And I said, I backed up away from him, and I said, please don't contact me. Please don't contact my relatives. And I talked again about my uncle who died in police custody. He was a homosexual in 1946, and that, my past, my family, I've gone to great lengths to get right with my family. And I, just don't contact my family. Then he said, then Cash got in my face again, and he was spitting as he was talking, but he was like really making his words pronounce. And he said, Steve, we need to talk to you right now. And it was like, I don't know, I would like a barroom brawler, okay? And so I backed away and I said, I'm not talking to you, and turned around and punched in the code, walked into the building, went upstairs to my condo, and then my attorney called, and I met with him later that day, and he told me that right after the police were at my place, they went to his office, made a scene in the secretary talking really loud, demanding to talk to him right away. He came into the lobby of his office, my attorney, and, they were demanding that I have, that he have me come to the office right then and all that stuff. And my attorney threatened to call the police to get him out of there, and they left. The very next day, they went to Shoshone, which is 30 miles north of here, and apparently they called my ex-wife, had her come to my son's house, my son Mark's house. He was the 5-year-old back in 1984, and talked to, and they talked to, according to my ex-wife, she said, we've been divorced since 2001, and apparently she says that she told the police she didn't remember December 20th, 1984. She doesn't remember what she was doing 35 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago. And she said her conversation was short. My son, and you have to keep in mind, my son is a very quiet person, and he's not much of a talker. He's totally opposite from me. But my son told me that he says Perel said to him that somebody that was at my youngest son Carl's memorial said that I stood at some point in the service I stood over the ashes of my son Carl and said, I hope this didn't happen because of Jonelle Matthews. Well, my son Mark knew that was not true, and my my son said something like, "That's bullshit," was kind of like his real quick reaction. And then he said to Pearl, "I don't want to talk to you anymore." And then apparently both Cash and Pearl said to my ex-wife, "We've got an appointment with somebody to talk to them about Steven." And they didn't say who it was. And then they left there. Well, 9 days later, my daughter-in-law, Esther, died of breast cancer. She's been fighting it for years, but she died 9 days later. And, she's originally from Peru. And, my family has gone through the loss of, so, I feel compassion and I feel bad for, like, my son Mark, who, 9 days before his wife dies of breast cancer, these cops come up with this totally ridiculous thing that happened at his brother's memorial service. It's just a blatant lie. So the next thing that happened, to kind of keep moving along, the very next thing that happened that was on Friday. Then on April the 16th, I thought, being an INFJ, I think of all possibilities and what to do, what not to do, and all kinds of things. And I was thinking about this case over the weekend. So I just decided on Monday morning I would call the Twin Falls Police where I live and volunteer to give my DNA, and then the Greeley Police or the Twin Falls Police could give it to the Greeley Police, because if they're thinking that I was on December 20th, 1984, that I was at the Matthews house, I know for a fact, because I'm a podcast junkie. I listen to you regularly. I'm a podcast junkie. I know that in the last 18 months there's been some real extraordinary advances in technology with DNA. That on crime scenes, that on old crime scenes where they didn't find DNA before, in evidence they're finding it now. And so I thought kind of like to hit the ball out of the ballpark, to have like the knockout blow to eliminate the Greeley Police talking to me. If I just volunteered to give my damn DNA, then they could compare it against whatever they have at the house. They could compare it against, because I know from skeleton remains, you can get in teeth, you can get you can get the skeletal remains DNA, but there is possibility even with the skeletal remains to get DNA in certain cases. I know it's rare, but it can be done. So if they had DNA, they could at least eliminate me. That was my thinking. Well, the lady that I talked to, the dispatcher at the Twin Falls Police Department, had never had a request like that before. So she said she'd have somebody get back to me. So about an hour later, I got a call from Detective John Dobner, the sheriff's office, who used to be the Shoshone police chief. And I was one of the people who helped get him fired from the Shoshone Police Department. So there was some bad blood between he and I, but now he's a detective with the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office. Anyway, he called me, and he said, it's my understanding, he said that he had been the contact person here for the Greeley Police Department when they were here. And he said, it's my understanding you want to voluntarily give your DNA. And I said yes, and just from my past relationship with police department. I said, "Are you recording this conversation?" He said, "Yes." So I said, "Yes. Well, aren't most cold cases solved these days by DNA?" And of course he said yes. And I said, "Well, there you go. I'll give you my damn DNA. You give it to the Greeley Police Department. They eliminate me." And I think I said something to the effect of, "This will save the Colorado taxpayers. This will save Idaho taxpayers a lot of money if I just do this." So I made an appointment to come down an hour later, went to the sheriff's office. Detective Dobner and another detective took me into a interrogation room. Detective Dobner put 2 swabs on and did the left side of the cheek inside my mouth, the right side of the cheek inside my mouth, and put them in a bag. And he said, "Thank you very much. You're free to go." I left. In my mind, I was thinking that would be the end of it. I would never hear from the Greeley Police Department again. They would go on for other things. You have to keep in mind on the 25th, Sunday, August 25th, my daughter-in-law died. There was funeral, memorial service plans. There was all kinds of things going on there. August 25th, we were focused on my son Mark because we had another tragedy in my family. Now, fast forward to September 4th. It's roughly 10:30 in the morning. I get a call from Dobner, and he says, "Steve, when I took your DNA, there was some paperwork I should have done, and so I need you to come down right away." I'm sorry, no, this was 9:30 a.m. And he says, "I need you to be down here by 10 o'clock. And, well, I hadn't shaved, showered. I wasn't really dressed. And so I said, "What's this about? Do you have an ulterior motive?" Because I was being an INFJ, I was listening to his voice and kind of, reading between the lines. And he said no. And so I said, "Well, I'll shave, shower, and get dressed, and I'll be there between 10:30 and 11. So I heard him kind of like talk to somebody in the background, and then he says, "Yes." And so I asked again if he had an ulterior motive, and his voice kind of went up again. And so, I didn't know what it was, but I thought that there was more to it than just paperwork. So I agreed to be there between 10:30 and 11. I shaved, showered, and on my way there, I called on my cell phone my attorney, told him what Dobner had said. He says, "Don't go to Dobner's office, come to my office. And if Dobner has paperwork to do, he can come here, bring the paperwork here, and he can do it in front of me." So I pull into my attorney's office, and 2 SUVs pull in right behind me. I get out of my driver's door, and I'm guessing a dozen SWAT guys and officers in full SWAT get out of these 2 vehicles. And I just stand there and I look at them because, if they wanted to catch me off guard and shock and awe, they succeeded. So I'm standing there, and one of them says to me, "Do you have any guns on you?" And I said, "No." He said, "Can I search you?" And I said, sure. I turned around, leaned against the vehicle. He searched me, found nothing. And another one of them asked for my cell phone. So I gave him my cell phone. He took the case off, and he said, we're confiscating your cell phone. They hand me two pieces of paper. One of them is titled a warrant of detention, and the only thing in the warrant of detention is it states probable cause exists to believe that a felony, to wit, ICE Idaho Code 184502, kidnapping Idaho Code 18403, homicide, was committed by the defendant, Steve and Dana Pankey. And anyway, it names Jonelle Matthews as the reported victim. And the only thing it asks, or the only thing that it requires, is my cell phone on my person be given to them. So that's the only thing that the warrant of detention is about. So they had that. The search warrant, you've got in Exhibit Exhibit A. You've got all the things that they asked for and took from inside my place. They asked for codes, keys to get in, or they were going to break down the door. So I gave codes to get in, and they took, and they had my, I have two cars. They're both 2019. I bought them both in January. 229 Subarus. I was driving the Forester. It's got like 2,000 miles on it. It's never been out of the Twin Falls area. And that's what I drove to my attorney's office. They towed that, put it on a car hauler, and towed it to the sheriff's impound. When they gave me the thing of like what they took from it, they didn't take anything from it. There was nothing in it. And they put this police evidence tape all over it that my son and I had to spend 2 hours with a heat gun to get it off of there. And they searched my condo, took all the stuff in Exhibit A. They searched, everybody's got a storage locker where I keep my bicycles and stuff like that and tools. They didn't take anything from that because there was nothing they found interesting there. They searched my 2019 Subaru Legacy, which has 4,000 miles on it. It's never been to Colorado, it's only been to California and back. And they didn't take anything from it. And today is exactly 40 days since they took all of this stuff. And obviously they didn't find anything, otherwise I'd be in jail.
Right. And could you just remind the listeners, what date did this happen on? By the way, anybody who is listening to this, we are doing this interview on October 14th, 2019. What day was it that all of this happened? Again, please.
September 4th, 2019.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so what did your lawyer have to say? I mean, this is all happening in his parking lot. Did he come out? So they didn't they didn't take you into custody. They just took everything and just left you there, or how did that all happen?
They just took everything and left me there.
Wow. Okay.
My son took a day off of work to come down and get me, and my attorney advised me to be with my son all day long, and until the police contacted him that they had cleared my house to stay completely away from where I live, until the had left. And so my son and I, we went to AT&T, and I got a new cell phone. And I actually have 3 different phones because I'm an investor and I do other things. And so buying a new laptop, buying a new printer, buying 3 new cell phones. So I've got right at $10,000 in immediate out-of-pocket besides attorney fees.
Mm-hmm.
And they found nothing.
Okay, well, that was a lot. I know that listeners are saying, was that still listening? I've been listening to every word. I want to assure you that, Steve, even though you were just talking about a lot of things that were in the outline, so I was more than happy to just let you talk about all of that. I do have to ask you this. At any point in the last 35 years, and we're going to get into what we call Exhibit B very shortly. At any point over the last 35 years, has anybody in law enforcement ever asked you to take a lie detector test?
No.
They've never asked you?
I don't think so.
Okay, and I'm guessing you've never taken one.
I've never taken one because the affidavit by Detective Dobner is what both the warrant of detention and the search warrant are based on. That's what they're basing the accusation of kidnapping and murder on. And that is sealed by law. That is sealed. Now, they do have discretion if they wanted to release that to me and my attorney, which they have not done. And, you know, there's no point in me taking a lie detector test without knowing what's in that search warrant, because that's the key of whatever they supposedly have to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what I mean, I have to ask because in not all, but many of the disappearances that I cover, suspects are given lie detector tests. Most of the time, they choose to take them. We hear a lot about people failing them. We hear about a lot of people passing them. We hear a lot about people taking them and not getting the results. So I have to feel that in this case, this is why I have to ask you that, is that they've never asked you to take one and you've never volunteered to take one.
I have volunteered to take one, wanting to get from them what they have to that interests me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, obviously, you're saying that you're innocent. I'm asking you, why have you never said, you know what, I didn't do this. You hook me up to any polygraph test, whatever you want to do, and you ask me any questions you want to ask me about Jonelle Matthews. I'm going to pass this test, and then we can just forget about all this. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Well, I'm willing to do that. In my mind, the DNA was a bigger yes or no, up or down, and I know from podcasts that there have been huge advances in DNA.
Sure,
to where that on old cases they have found DNA that they didn't know was on there before. So I know that some people take polygraphs as almost like it's scriptural.
And I'm not one of those people. And I know, and the listeners know I am. They're just a tool like anything else. They're not. There's a reason they're not used in courts. Yada yada yada. But what I guess I'm saying is that the natural inclination, I think, from the public is that if somebody's innocent, then that is one more way, on top of DNA, to just show that, you know what, you can ask me any questions, you can hook me up to this machine that is supposed to be so good, and you're going to see that I'm going to pass this test, and then that'll be that. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, I'm willing to do that. In my mind, everybody agrees with DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And if your DNA is where it ain't supposed to be, you're going down.
Sure.
And so that's I guess
That's surely true. But DNA only works if there's actually DNA on the body, and if there's no DNA in the body, then you giving them DNA doesn't help anything.
Sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If I were in her house on December 20th, 1984, which I wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
and if I know I wasn't there, then I know my DNA wasn't there. And no matter how far DNA is expanded or advanced. And so I was giving my DNA. So anyway.
Okay. All right. But just on the record, you've never taken a lie detector test ever for anything.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
All right. Okay, and before we get into Exhibit B, what you call Exhibit B, which is a PDF file that you sent me not so long ago, do you believe in general that the reason that, of course, they've served this warrant, they took your cars, yada, 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 all traces back to the conversation you had with FBI agent Lyons in early 1985?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. All right, let's get to Exhibit B. And this is where I think, listeners, what you've heard to this point is a guy who is professing his innocence. Once again, that's up to you to determine whether you think he's being truthful or not. I'm just here to answer the questions and, clear anything up that I think that might be unclear or just maybe probe things a little farther. But you should know that Steve does have his beliefs regarding Jonelle's disappearance. He isn't just a guy who is claiming he is innocent. He actually, I guess, believes in what actually did happen to her. He's not just saying that he didn't do it. He actually has a theory on what did happen to her. And it was a PDF file that he sent to me, and some emails, of course, that we had back and forth as well. But there was one in particular called the Exhibit B, a PDF file where he drew up his own idea of what went on. And where I want to start with this, Steve, is when did you find out who was the person that dropped Jonelle off at her house that night? When did you find that out?
It would have either been through the paper or TV. It would have been either later on the day that my father-in-law came, either that evening, the next day, or in the next few days.
Okay, so you knew.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
There was no exact moment that I knew that.
Okay, because I looked into this. Now, you are saying that you found out, and he's a name of a guy you've already mentioned. His name is Russell Ross. You are saying that somehow within a week to 2 weeks after she disappeared, you somehow found out that it was Russell Ross who dropped off, and he was with one of his children who dropped off Jonelle at her home that night. Somehow you found this out.
I found it out through either radio, TV, or newspaper.
Okay.
Between December 27th and the next few days. It wasn't long.
Okay. Would you be surprised to know, and I'm a pretty good searcher, as are my assistants, would you be surprised to know that I could not find anywhere on the internet, not Googling it, not going to websleuths.com, nowhere, not on newspapers.com, to articles going back to that time around when she disappeared, where his name comes up as the person who dropped off Jonelle that day? Would that surprise you? Because I've done it.
Yeah.
I spent a couple hours trying to find his name. Now, please.
Did you hear local news broadcasts from that area?
No, I don't think there's anything on there on the internet regarding that. But I did look up newspapers, and I did look up his name just in general, in relation to Jonelle Matthews' case, and it comes up nowhere. Now, I will admit that there are many articles about, in fact, I even found a discrepancy. I found something that very early on, there is an article in the local newspaper in Colorado that said that it was this girl's mother, or this child's mother and the child who dropped off Jonelle. And then in a later article, several years later, in a coverage of Jonelle's disappearance, maybe 13 years later, that is then changed to the father and the child dropping off Jonelle. But their names are never mentioned in any of those articles.
There is no doubt in my mind, if you pulled up, if it's humanly possible, local reporting on this, that his name was, that he and his daughter, I believe his daughter's name is Deanna, something like that.
Okay.
That they dropped her off.
Okay.
It was also talked about, people at my church across the street were talking about it. People know people who knew people. No, there's nothing mysterious about my knowing that.
Okay. All right, that's probably going to be okay. Thank you for that, and I'm sure there's some people are going to hear that, and they're probably going to start looking for themselves. And I do have listeners in Colorado that may be able to have access to local news tapes, and I'm sure, I know it's 35 years ago, but they do archive stuff like that, so that would be interesting. But once again, I'm telling you the truth. I couldn't find anything like that, but maybe I missed something. Okay. So, and like I said, even on the reporting of it over the years, there have been discrepancies because once again, it said the mother, and then at some point they changed it to the father. Now, you and Russell Ross have a history. Very, as quickly as you can, while being accurate at the same time. You and he had a history going back to the late 70s. You two happened to work together. Please explain that and why you two had a problem with each other.
I went to work for 7-Up as a delivery truck driver about 1978. And I worked there through 1980 when I was fired by Russ. I tried to start a union at Greeley 7-Up, and Terry Silliphant, who was the manager, was taken to Denver 7-Up, and they sent in Russ Ross as the new manager, kind of the union buster. And Officer John Gates, who is now the mayor, his parents owned Greeley 7-Up before I worked there, but they still owned the building that Greeley 7-Up was in when I was working there. Russ beat me up, him and two other men, over the union deal. Russ also went to Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, where the Matthews were at that time. And then Greeley police officer John Gates had gone to 7-Up saying that I had been accused of date rape.
It goes back to that date rape from 1977.
Yeah.
All right, and they ended up getting you fired. In what year were you fired from that job?
In 1980.
80.
After there was when I was beat up, there was the Teamsters Union did a federal NLRB lawsuit against Russ Ross and 7-Up, and I won. I was fired, and I won a $20,000 judgment. Now that's $1984 dollars,
Mm-hmm.
which you could buy a house in Greeley for.
Right.
You could pay cash for a house in Greeley for $20,000.
Okay, so that was a considerable lawsuit that you won against him, I guess against the company or however it was determined.
Right.
Okay. All right, so there was a beef between you two. There was a beef. Okay. And so but you got fired in 1980. This lawsuit went on but did you personally run into Russell Ross anywhere around Greeley, Colorado during that time between you getting fired and the disappearance in 1984? Did you ever happen to run into him?
No.
Never.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. So then, being that you had these problems with him and everything else, and then once again, not long after Jonelle disappeared, somehow you found out that it just coincidentally happened to be your old supervisor, Russ Ross, who dropped her off that night. At that point, and once again, you being innocent, her going missing, at that point, did you think that Russ Ross could have done something to Jonelle Matthews?
I doubted it. Now, he had special knowledge, obviously, that she was home alone, and he had knowledge of that. But in my opinion of Russ Ross, I think that if Russ Ross came across a man who did this to Jonelle, I think Russ would make that person disappear.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he would do it to a 12-year-old girl. No.
Okay.
I think he's a total jerk from my perspective, but I don't think he would. In my viewpoint, I actually feel sorry for Russ Ross because, had I have dropped a middle school child off at their home, and then they disappeared, and like the garage door was open or halfway open or whatever it is,
mm-hmm.
and I watched them get in the door, I think I would feel guilty for the rest of my life that could I have done something better,
Okay.
So,
all right.
I personally see him as more a victim in this than a villain.
Okay. Because I have to admit, not that I'm going to, that's totally up to you, that, as far as the PDF that you sent me, I have to admit that it has a feeling to it that's a little bit more explicit than what you're saying here. That's my opinion, once again, that it sounds to me that you're pointing a finger at him a little bit more than what you're stating in this interview, my opinion.
Well, I agree with you. What I'm getting at is if you're looking for people if you're looking at people you're trying to narrow down people
mm-hmm.
most likely to do it, he had special knowledge. He had specific knowledge that she was home alone. Okay?
Right.
I didn't know she existed or disappeared. Okay?
Right. I know that, yes. Okay, fair enough. All right, so he dropped her off, but it wasn't alone. He wasn't alone with Jonelle. He was with one of his children. And there is proof that Jonelle was at home because she got that phone call. So it's not like Russ is lying about dropping her off. She was home, and she took this phone call. Okay, all right, very good.
Right.
All right, how close, once again, if you know at the time, or maybe you've learned since, how close were the Rosses and the Matthews? Did the families hang out? Did they go to parties together, or did their kids just happen to be in the same, class together? Do you know how close they were?
I don't know any of that. When I worked, I don't know where Russ lived in 1984. I know that in 1978, 79, he owned a house in Greeley, and it was over a different different neighborhood in not a real older neighborhood, but houses like from the 60s in a different section of town. And I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was kind of a blue-gray house that, but I was never inside of it. I had dropped off. He had when he had a 7-Up car that was provided for him when he was a supervisor, and he was sick one day or something like that, and I went with another 7-Up person to either get it or drop it off. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he lived in a different part of town.
Okay. How close would you say that?
Like 70.
Okay. How close would you say? Once again, I know it's been years. How close would you say? Would you say that Russell Ross lived closer to the Matthews, or would you say you live closer to the Matthews? The way you think about it back then.
I'm guessing about the same distance, but from different directions.
Okay, thank you. All right, so to put this all together, the person who dropped Jonelle off was your boss at one time, a guy who you had problems with, who was part of a lawsuit, you on one side of the lawsuit, he on the other, he and the company on the other, and they ended up losing. And this lawsuit was settled right around the time that Jonelle disappeared, or I'm not clear on that.
No. It was settled in 1980.
Oh, it was settled in 1980. Okay. All right. But since then, still, you weren't working for him or anything, but you are of the opinion that he still had bad blood against you because of that? Or was it like just bygones be gone?
I don't know. I don't know that he did or didn't have blood against me.
Okay. All right. Let's. I'm just going to ask you another frank question. Do you think that Russell? Once again, you've talked about your father-in-law and, of course, this conversation. Do you think that Russell Ross could have been a person who also, given this bad beef, given these problems he had with you, given that he dropped Jonelle off that night, do you think it is possible that he could have put the police onto you, being that he would have known about this rape charge back in the 1970s? Do you think he could have had anything to do with the police, hounding you, suspecting you?
Yes, possibly.
Okay. All right.
I don't know.
Okay, I know. I'm just asking you if it's a possibility. We don't know. We don't know what's in his head, and none of us have been keeping track of Russell Ross over the last 39 years. But he's the guy that dropped her off. He's had problems with you. And so I have to ask these questions. If it was some stranger who dropped her off that night who you didn't know and never had a beef with and everything, then I wouldn't be asking these questions. But I have to ask them just because I know that people are going to wonder about these things. So, but being that you said that there was a...
Can I mention one more thing?
Please, go ahead. This is your interview, please.
Okay. I had a chance meeting at a grocery store or gas station or something like that with the guy who was the truck supervisor who was directly under Ross, a few weeks after the disappearance. This was just a chance thing. And he told me that right after, within days after the girl disappeared, that Russ was fired from 7-Up for stealing. He and another guy were fired. He and a truck driver were fired from 7-Up. So I had that conversation, which I thought was unique.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay. All right, but we just don't know about that. Okay, maybe that is just a coincidence. Right. Okay, but you've already detailed, though, that Russ did have a connection to somebody in the police department, and this was the guy who was a detective at the time. He's a mayor now. But at the time, in the early 80s, this guy, John Gates, his family owned the building, I guess at the time you worked there, owned the building where 7-Up Greeley was, and Russ worked there, and this Gates family owned the building. So there is a connection between Russ and somebody who worked in the police department.
Right.
Okay. And do you happen to know how close Russell Ross and John Gates were at the time in the early 80s? Were they tight, loose, somewhere in between? What do you think?
I would say loose to somewhere between. I can't specifically define it for you.
Okay. But they knew each other, and
They definitely knew each other.
Okay.
They definitely talked about me, because the excuse for firing me is I was accused of the lady who did the bookwork in Greeley 7-Up's office, who was like a college student. Her boyfriend, who stands like 6'2", and I'm like 5'11", he got in an argument with me, and he got physical with me, and I think the whole thing was a setup, and Gates was the officer who responded, and Gates wrote me a ticket for, I don't know if it was disturbing peace or assault or something like that, but it was a misdemeanor ticket, and I gave it to my attorney, and it was just thrown out. But and that was the excuse for firing me.
Okay. All right. In these misdemeanors, of course, you mentioned them as we're going close to the 3-hour mark with this interview. But early on, you talked about all these misdemeanors that you got. When you got these misdemeanors, how many of them was Officer John Gates responsible for? How many run-ins did you have with him in particular regarding those misdemeanors you got from the Greeley Police Department?
2.
2? Okay. All right. And so he knew who you were. He knew that, that there was something going on. Would you say that those 2 in particular, were they cooked up? Did you deserve them? What do you think?
I would say that they were cooked up.
Okay. What were they?
One was the the one with the boyfriend of
Okay.
the girl who worked in the office.
Okay. Right.
7-Up, and then the other one was the one where when there was a I had written a check that bounced, and he had written a misdemeanor thing on it.
Okay.
And it was after, and it was also dismissed. It was after the 7-Up thing.
Okay. Was Officer John Gates at the time responsible in any way to investigate Jonelle's disappearance, once again, to your knowledge?
Yes. According to the recent Colorado Sun internet website, news website, John Mayer Gates told that web paper that he was the 3rd detective at Jonelle Matthews' house the night she disappeared.
Okay.
My thought on when I read that is, well, what were you doing before you were the 3rd detective there?
Well, I that may seem interesting, but I got to tell you, a lot of times police don't show up at all regarding disappearances, even when it's children. Once again, my experience, I wouldn't expect you to know something like that, but I can tell you with 150 missing persons cases that oftentimes police are slow to show up, even when it's teenagers or early teenagers. That might be different when it's very, very small children. But okay, if that's what he says, maybe he's just doing that to pad his resume, being that he's mayor, and probably nobody would remember that anyway, just wants to say he was doing something. I don't know how we would find that out anyway, but okay. To your knowledge, I have to ask this. Has Russell Ross ever been asked about his whereabouts for that evening after he dropped Jonelle off? Has that anything ever come out to you? No idea. Okay. But there is actual proof that he did because Jonelle answered that phone call. And let's move on to this. This is once again one of the items that you sent to me. We talked about December 20th. And on that day, you say that you were and your wife were packing her car. You said you were putting things in the car that wouldn't freeze. Right. You say that you were at home at the time that Jonelle would have disappeared. However, when did you see these two cars pull into your driveway? Did you think anything of it at the time? This is something that you sent to me. Tell the listeners about it.
On the evening of December 20th, 1984, the car was packed with non-freezable stuff, and I looked out the kitchen window, which would have been the front window, to look at because we lived on an acre, we had a front-wheel drive car, and we were going to leave early the next morning to make sure that the snowfall wasn't such that we couldn't get out of the driveway. I knew once we got out on the highway in front we'd be okay, but just looking there. Two vehicles pulled in my driveway. The first one, as I remember, it was about a 1978 Ford Courier pickup that was light-colored with a dark-colored right front fender. The one right behind it was a mist green Chevy Nova four-door, like the cheap model, which I knew that the Will County Sheriff's Office had two of those for delivering papers, like civil papers, serving papers. And so I assumed it was like that, used as an unmarked police car. You pulled into the driveway. I thought, oh no, I might be getting another arbitrary charge. The cars pulled in. They looked, shined like their headlights shined towards my house and then towards Cliff Sharp's house to the west of me. They turned around and left. So I thought, after that, I thought no more of it. I didn't think about that again until the conversation with my father.
A week later.
You have to keep in mind, if I didn't have the conversation with my father-in-law, I would have forgotten long ago what happened that night. I would have forgotten long ago about the two vehicles pulling in the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
So the connection to that is because of my father-in-law conversation.
Right. And the way you remember it, in relation to the time that is accepted, that hour in which Jonelle was home by herself, how close was this time of these cars pulling in to her in that hour? About the same time, before, after? What do you think?
I'm not sure. I wasn't looking at a clock.
Mm-hmm.
I know we were going to bed earlier than we normally would. We normally went to bed probably 11 or 12 o'clock, like between 11 and midnight, normally. We went to bed earlier because we were getting up like 3, 4 in the next morning. And I know that, we put the boy to bed by 9 o'clock anyway, but we put him earlier to bed than we normally would because he was going to be getting up early.
Okay.
So I just plain can't give you an exact time frame. I'm guessing you'd be around 10:30 when I looked out the front window and saw.
Okay. So
your
your best guess would be after the time that Jonelle disappeared. Your best guess.
That would be my guess.
Okay. And you want to? I think I want to be clear about something. This unmarked car. You're not saying that was a Greeley Police Department car. You're saying that was a county sheriff or something car.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Have they played any role in this disappearance at all? We really haven't talked about. I mean, I have to admit, we talk about sheriffs a lot more, maybe in a state like Texas. But in Colorado, have they played any role in the investigation of Jonelle's disappearance at all?
Yes. It was on their turf that her body was found.
Well, I mean, at the time. Maybe I should be more specific. At the time in 1984, when she goes missing, were they the ones? They lead the investigation.
No, it was Greeley Police.
Okay. But just to be clear, once again, because I think when I read that, I read it as being a Greeley Police Department undercover car, but you're saying it was a county undercover car.
No, it was a county.
All right, thank you. Do you have any suspicion, once again, this would just be a guess, do you have any suspicion who was in either of those cars?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, if you want to use a name, if you have a suspicion, this would be the time to do it. I mean, because I want to, if you can take a guess. Do you know it? Have you ever seen that truck before? It's a miscolored truck. Seems like it would have stuck out.
I've never seen it before or since.
Okay.
I think if I were to suspect anybody, it would be John Gates, and that I personally believe that, I believe he's the one who made Officer Jones chief of police. He's the one who I believe is the motivating factor in pointing it to me.
Okay.
That's my belief.
Okay,
but prove that? No.
Okay, but just to be clear, though, this Gates guy did not work for the county. He was a city cop. He was not a county deputy.
Correct.
So he wouldn't have been in the county vehicle. So you're saying he might have been in the pickup truck. Could you? I'm sorry, you went out there for a second. Could you please say that? Was that a yes?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's all right. So you're saying that your suspicion is that Gates, once again, your theory of events is that Gates might have been in the miscolored or discolored or multicolored pickup truck and not the county vehicle.
I wouldn't call it a guess. I would call it a suspicion, a possibility.
Okay. And as far as the county vehicle goes, any deputies, law enforcement officers at the county level that you could have pointed at and say maybe that was the person driving the county vehicle?
There was a red-haired detective who was a few years younger than me with the Will County Sheriff's Office. I don't remember his name. I remember his face. He was a little shorter than me. He was about my build.
Mm-hmm.
And he was mad at me because in 1982 he had arrested Steve Adams and another man on a burglary that happened in Evans, that's the city directly south of Greeley, for stealing $20,000 worth of rare coins. And that might have been equal or more to the value than the house that it was taken from in 1981, $82. And Steve Adams had talked to me and given me information on it. And when I asked Adams, I said, "Were you in that house when nobody else was there?" And he said, "Yes." I had thrown up my hands and I said, "I don't want to hear anymore." And anyway, the detective was unhappy with me that he felt I had blown his case because I went to my attorney, Don Janquo, and I was at a preliminary hearing. I was put on the witness stand. Steve Adams and the other man were the defendant, and on the witness stand, I said I couldn't remember what the conversation was, and the case was thrown out against him, and so that detective was really mad at me. He said he'd put a lot of time into it. So.
Okay. Now, you made a serious, being now that we've talked a little bit about the cops, and you've made, we've talked about this Gates guy, and now you've talked about this county detective. We have to go back to something you said that was a while ago that was a very provocative statement, that you believe that the police for a long time have known where Jonelle's remains were, and they knew that eventually that they would get found. How can you say something like that? Why?
Well, that's what I believe. According to reports, according to Killer Vibes broadcast and all, of May 10th, 2019, which I listened to, it said on there that they were searching certain areas and all, and I became aware that they were searching, and this has come out in the papers, so your listeners can find it online, but they dug 3 holes in the front yard of the house, 6086 West 10th Street, where I lived, in April, May, somewhere around in there. And all of a sudden, I guess all of a sudden that after 35 years, they find her body where they find it east of LaSalle. And when they're doing all this digging and the case is really heated up, and they've made multiple contacts to me or my attorney in the last few months and all, I guess you can either say God interferes in the affairs of man, or the police move evidence to make a case. And I personally think both are possible, the latter more probable. So I think on December 20th, 1984, I think Jonelle had a confrontation with a trusted adult. I think there was an instant physical confrontation. She was injured, killed, whatever. And I think that there were relationships between the police and Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. And I don't think for a minute that a cop went to her house and abducted her and killed her.
You don't believe that? What you just said is you don't believe that it was actually a police officer who showed up at her house that abducted her.
No,
okay.
I don't believe that. I believe you have to keep in mind, and this would have been 7 years before, 7, 8, 9 years before, that I was the youth pastor of the church he went to. So I didn't know everybody there, but I knew a lot of things about the people there. I didn't want my 5-year-old to be in that church. So I think that there was a confrontation with at least one trusted adult. There was injury, death, whatever. And I think possibly they could have contacted a law enforcement. And I think knowing law enforcement, in my absolute belief that homophobia and racial prejudice go together, if you look what her stepfather, stepmother, stepsister says about Jonelle, what her friends say about her, and I'm sure that your people who are good sleuths, good at looking stuff up, would find, by all accounts, Jonelle was a strong-willed 12-year-old. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing illegal about it. That's fine being that. I think her being biologically Hispanic in that church, I think that there were some who would have been willing to put her in a place. And I think the difference between an adult size-wise and a middle schooler in a physical confrontation, I think the middle schooler would lose. And so this is a theory. I can't back it up. But I think at that time, I think then, somebody then calling a cop friend and saying, I didn't mean for this to happen, it just happened. And I think then a cop friend
went to your father-in-law and asked for a favor.
Well, yes, that's my theory, but I can't prove it.
Okay. But are you then saying that, do you think that this person went over to the house knowing that Jonelle was there alone?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Okay. I know that you didn't have a very close relationship with your father-in-law, but do you believe that he was closer to one police officer closer than all the others, and that one could have been the one that came to him? I mean, if we're going to believe his story, I guess we have no choice but to believe it, that some cop came to talk to him. Is there any particular cop that he was closer to than all the others that could have come and done that?
I don't know that he had a relationship with any police.
Okay.
Which is part of, you have to keep, this is part of when the questions that I was asked by Agent Lyons at the end, why I was so into jumping ship to believing this was kids on a kid, okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Ed, it doesn't, what happened doesn't make sense in my own head, okay?
Okay.
But I'm not going to embellish, and I'm just going to say, this is what happened. I can't explain it. Why?
I guess what I'm saying is, the reason you think that, once again, in your perception, the way you understand everything that's happened, and of course you've been the focus of this since April, at least, with warrants and seizing of cars and everything else, you find it particularly peculiar that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they start contacting you in April, then all of a sudden in July they find Jonelle's remains.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that would be unique to any rational person, but I don't know. I think.
Well, I guess I'm going to have to tend to agree with you. 35 years is a long time. and to think that they're not talking to you for all this time, and even though once in a while maybe something popped up here and there, but that nothing going on, then all of a sudden they're trying to find you, they're talking to you, and 2 months later somehow some gas company happens to pawn your remains. I suppose it could get a lot of people to thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. So, what I'm trying to say is this is the reason that you think the police might have known where remains were all the time, because you can't discount the coincidence of it, that it maybe wasn't a coincidence.
Right. I would say it would be consistent with the theory that the police knew all along, but it's certainly not proof.
Okay. Do you believe that now in 2019 you were trying to be framed for the murder of Jonelle Matthews?
Yes, I think that there's. I think when something happens to a kid, it's a natural thing that adults, it really gets to them, and somebody needs to pay. I think that's the way people think of it.
Mm-hmm.
My phone number it's still on my website. I've had people leave me very angry messages, just flat out accusing me of killing her, molesting her, all kinds of things.
Sure.
That flat didn't happen. But anytime you mention something happening to a kid, it's going to provoke emotions.
I'm sure. I got to ask you, you believe that you are being framed, being that you claim that you didn't do it, and now they're serving warrants and all of these things. And once again, you've made some serious allegations regarding the police having known, at least some of them, knowing where her remains have been all this time. If they knew where her remains were all this time, why are they now just in 2019 getting around to trying to frame you when they could have done this back in 1985?
Well, in 1985, there was no gas and oil drilling operation going on that property. Her body could have been decaying, wouldn't be found, it wouldn't be an issue, it wouldn't be doing anything like that. When they've got this thing there now 35 years after the fact, they're drilling, they keep drilling, then I think the body's going to be found at some point, and you need to have somebody. Let me turn that around. If they just came right out and said, Officer X disposed of the body out there, and she did that, I think that they would be flooded with lawyers over the years that would be making motions to overturn many criminal cases from before then to the current.
I guess what I'm saying is 35 years is a long time to wait to frame somebody.
Well, 35 years is a long time to find a body. So I think the fact that the body, thinking that a good chance that a body would be found. I mean, why 35 years later at all? I lived in Greeley for 2 years after this happened. I mean, why 35 years later at all?
Well, Well, that's why maybe I need to ask you this question then. Do you believe, if you believe that you're being framed, and obviously they're coming after you quite hard, and obviously, as you've stated, you had problems with the Greeley Police Department well before Jonelle went missing. Do you believe they hatched this plan to frame you for the murder back then? Or is this a plan that just was hatched this year?
I have no idea.
I mean, well, have you thought about it? Have you thought about it?
Not in those terms. Not really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living in the present.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm saying is, if we were to believe, I'm not saying I necessarily believe that, but you said it, so we have to talk about it. If you believe that the police have known where her remains have been for a long time, long time meaning years and years and years, do you think then sometime back in, let's say, March of 2019, they knew where this pipe was going to be going, and they said, you know what, those remains, they're right in the line of where this pipeline is going to be, and there's no way we're going to be out there and get that without somebody seeing this. We're going to have to find somebody to pin this on when the remains are found. Do you believe that happened?
No.
Okay.
No.
Then how do you think, where do you think this trying to put it on you has come from? And when did it start?
I think according to the website of the Greeley, city of Greeley, Gates, it was, 2017 that he became mayor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I know according to the Vibes podcast, what is there, NICMIC? Do you know what that is?
Excuse me?
NICMIC.
No, I'm not sure I'm familiar with it.
It's an acronym for... It's supposed to be someplace back east where all these old detectives who are superstars who get together and help police solve cold cases and all. Anyway, I know that Cash and a investigator and a prosecutor with the district attorney's office went there in January of 2018 and presented the Jonelle Matthews case to them. And I think that, I don't know this, but according to the May 15th Kilovibe podcast, or the May 10th, 2019 Kilovibes podcast, they focused in on a suspect or a person of interest or something like that. They didn't give a name.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this has been building for at least a year.
Okay.
I don't know that. You're asking questions, relevant questions, but I don't know.
Okay, but all I'm saying is that generally when people think that they're getting framed, they didn't do something, but somebody's trying to pin it on them. Usually they have an idea, why it started, when it started, etc. And what you're saying is that you're not quite sure about those answers, to those questions.
I agree with what you just said. I'm not quite sure answer this question.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess what I'm also asking is, being that they seem to be after you, that's the way you put it, these misdemeanors, 20 misdemeanors, of course, none of them ever stuck. I guess what I'm also asking is, do you believe this could be a revenge for you getting out of that 35 years ago?
I would assume that would be part of the motivation, and that's simply an assumption. Let me, Ed, I contacted you to do this interview.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't contact me.
That's true.
I want to be transparent.
I know you do.
But anytime people embellish anything, and then it turns out they're wrong about what they embellish,
Mm-hmm.
then they look like guilty or they look like a fool. So what I'm saying, Ed, is there's some things I just don't understand here,
Okay.
and I'm leery on going where I don't know because I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. I want to make sure that when we're done this interview that everybody feels that, including myself, that I probed this allegation. Once again, you stated it. It's just a theory. I realize if we knew what happened, it could just be solved today. As I've said many times on all the if we knew what happened, we could just go solve it right now. Whoever did it, whatever happened, we could just do it right now. But when somebody, and we talk about crooked cops on Unfound. If you listen to the program, we do that.
Right.
In fact, of one of Unfound's most famous cases that continues in, it's partially solved because the remains were found. We are the one that kind of put it out there that maybe law enforcement should be looked at in this disappearance. It's the most popular episode that Unfound ever did. So we're used to talking about corrupt cops. But I don't think that we've gone to the extent of saying that, police knew where these remains were and just let them there for all these years. This is something, it's just a theory of yours. It's just a suspicion you have. And it is based on the fact that here they were out of nowhere starting to talk to you, and then 2 months later, remains were found. It's just a little too weird to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
All
I think it's consistent with my theory.
Okay.
I don't think it's proof, but I think it's consistent with my theory.
Okay. And I'm just going to ask you point blank now to give you an opportunity, and then I want to ask you about one more thing. Are you responsible for the disappearance and death of Jonelle Matthews?
No, I did not know she existed or disappeared until 6 days after the fact.
Okay. Thank you. Since this has all happened, I know that you're divorced. Have you had a chance to talk to your wife at the time about any of this?
Yeah, in this conversation we talked about that. She told me when the police that the Greeley police had contacted her on August 16th.
Okay. If you can say, how does she feel about all this?
I think she feels that I've always been a controversial person, and I'm a person who takes on the big boys, doesn't leave things lie, and I think she thinks this is just my life, and she's glad she's gone a different direction.
Okay. All right. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Steve, I think we've come to the end of this interview. I'm going to give you an opportunity. Any last words before we complete it?
Ed, I want to thank you and Unfound for giving me this opportunity. It's the lengthiest interview I've had. I think you have been very fair to me, and I think you've been fair to justice. You've asked hard questions, but you have given me the opportunity to say my part. I also look forward to the comments and the whatever your listeners who are sleuths find. So thank you, Ed. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's my job. I am a missing persons reporter, but I'm a journalist first. So you contacted me. I talked it over with my assistants. Everybody knows who they are. And we, kind of threw around, do we want to do this? How do we want to do this? And in the end, we decided that, you know what? We are just going to treat you like we treat every other person on here. We're going to ask tough questions. The guest is going to give the answers. And then it's up to the listeners to determine whether the person is telling the truth or not. Of course, like I said, I don't think that we've had anybody else on the program who is a person of interest or has had warrants served on them or anything else. but I'm perfectly willing to treat a person as innocent until proven guilty. But I also know that as a journalist, I have to ask the tough questions, and that's just what I do. That's just my job. But I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. And if you are innocent, I hope that they do catch who did this, so this can be off your mind for the rest of your life. But I also want to say, if you are guilty, then I hope they prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Okay? That's my attitude.
Understood.
Okay. Steve, thank you for this interview.
And thank you, sir.
All right. You're welcome.
And that was my October 14th, 2019 interview with Steve Pankey, the man who is currently on trial for the murder of Jonelle Matthews. The interview was eventually made public on November 4th, 2019. Now, how Steve came to be on the program. And I will not be using a script to tell you about it because it's still very clear in my mind. In July of 2019, here's what I remember about July of 2019. That was the month that I drove to Amarillo, Texas for that meetup, and then I went to Canadian, Texas, met up with Penny Meek, Tom Brown's mother, and Tom's brother, and we drove around Hemphill County. She showed me some of the, of course, locations that are very important to the disappearance and now death of Tom. That's what I remember about that month. I also remember about that month that I went with my buddy Doug, my best friend Doug, long time best friend Doug. We went to the Iron Maiden concert down in Sunrise, Florida. Those are the 2 points I remember most about July of 2019. I do not remember reading any information about Jonelle Matthews' remains being discovered. I probably did, but I'm reading a lot of stories like that all the time. So I probably did come across a news story when her remains were found and how they were found, but never could I have imagined that just weeks later, a person who was a suspect in her disappearance, and now we know death, and now we know murder, would ever have contacted me. Once again, I'm guessing that I did read something about it in July of 2019. Little did I know where that would all go. So what happened was then in early August, a person named Steve became a Patreon supporter. And eventually I contacted this person, Steve, and thanked him and told him what he could get and what he's eligible for and all those things, as I do with everybody who becomes a Patreon supporter. Then sometime after that, not long after that, I'm saying late August, early September, he let me know that he was a person of interest in Jonelle's case, that over the years that the police had looked at him. These are my words, not exactly his words. And that he would like to come on Unfound and tell his story, what has gone on at that point over the last 35 years, and saying how he is innocent, and what has gone on in his point of view, and everything else. Those are my words, not his words. I'm trying to keep it concise. So I had a lot of thinking to do about that, because that is not the kind of program, obviously, that I do. I interview families, and because they are the ones who know the most about the disappearance, they can talk about the person himself or herself. And as you know, I don't talk to law enforcement too much because, once again, as I've said many, many times, they don't tell you anything. And I'm in the information business. So that is the reason that Unfound is set up the way it is. It's not set up to talk to suspects because, once again, suspects, if they are suspects, they may be, they could very well be guilty. They could very well be innocent. And you're just never sure quite what they're going to say. And so when it came to Steve, that he was willing to come on the program, realizing that he is a person of interest, realizing that he is a suspect, and wants to tell his side and how he is innocent. I had to think about it once again because that's not kind of the program that I do. And I have spoken to suspects after the fact, after an episode is played. A couple have come to mind. Judith Empke eventually got to speak to the next door neighbor that was allegedly having an affair with her. I spoke to him. And I got to speak to Juanita Nelson's father after the fact, after Juanita's sister had done the interview. And I have to say, he is a suspect. I'm not saying he did anything, but I've heard of crazier things. So I did have at least a little bit experience in that, but that was after the fact, after the episode already came out. So with Steve, it was going to be different. I had not covered Jonelle Matthews' disappearance at any time. And like I said, I don't even remember specifically knowing that her remains had been found. But Steve wanted to come on the program, and so I had to think about it, talk to my assistants about it, and the conclusion that I eventually came to was that, well, if we're going to do this interview, since he's coming to me, then there are no questions that are off limits. I'm not going to get into a situation where the person comes to me and wants to talk, and then on top of that, they get to choose what questions they're going to answer and which ones they're not going to answer. That doesn't sound like a very good setup to me, a very equitable setup. So I just said, okay. I tried to learn as much as I could about Jonelle's disappearance, death, and then by the time we got around to doing the episode or the interview, I think everybody knew it was a murder. And I was just going to get to ask any question. I put together a long outline. I sent it to Steve. He approved it, and we did the interview. And I'm going to state for the record, at no time did Steve ever say to me, no, I'm not going to answer that question. You can't say this. I'm not going to say this. Anything that was taken out of the interview, nothing. Zero. So the interview happened October 14th. Very, very, very coincidentally, it's the same 2 years later. I'm recording this on October 14th, 2021. So exactly 2 years ago is when I interviewed Steve. And we did the interview, and as you heard, it played with no edits. There is not one edit in it. From the time you hear me, I want to welcome Steve Pankey. From the time until we sign off at the end, there are no edits. It's all recording straight through, 3 hours, whatever it was, 3 hours and so many minutes. And so I did it. And then after that, I did talk to Russell Ross, although I did not record that conversation, but I did have a conversation with him. And then I had an email exchange with the mayor of Greeley, Colorado, who at the time was a police officer in Greeley, and had to talk to him because, once again, he was brought up during the interview. And in the original episode from November 2019, you can hear what Russell Ross had to say and what the current mayor of Greeley had to say. Once again, going back to that original episode from November 4th, 2019. So after the fact, after Steve had already been on the program, some things that I found out, and I forget how I found out about them, but I discovered that he had gotten in contact with several podcasts and maybe given them or sent them money. I know that he did that for my buddy John Lorden with his YouTube show. But for some reason, John chose not to interview him or whatever happened there. But I know that Steve did this for other places as well. Maybe in talking to John about this, he had told me I don't keep in touch with all that sort of stuff, maybe like John does. But my idea was that he had contacted several places, and I was the only person who took him up on his offer to interview him. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I feel comfortable doing interviews, and a lot of other podcasts don't have interviews, so then the host thinks, well, I don't know how well the interview is going to go if I'm going to do it. Me, that's all I do. So even though I had reservations about doing it, it eventually happened. I certainly did not doubt my capability, my skill, my talent, my experience of doing an interview with Steve. It was just from a format point of view and how my other guests, both prior and future guests, would feel about me giving equal time to a person who is a suspect. Once again, I don't know if Steve murdered Jonelle or not. But all I cared about was the perception of what I was doing for prior guests and future guests. And I'm happy to say it has not affected the program or the guests, family members at all. But it was certainly a huge consideration at the time. So that is how he came to be on the program. After the interview, that's the only time I've ever spoken to Steve on the phone. That interview, that's it. We had quite a few emails, messages back and forth before the interview, but not very many after. Not any long back and forths through email afterwards. It was mostly Steve sending me PDF files having to do with filings and all these things. And I have to remember, the way I remember it, I think I looked at them, but they did not leave a huge impression on me. And then at some point, late 2019, Steve and I did not have any contact at all. And then, as you all know, then a year later, in October 2020, is when he was finally charged with Jonelle's murder. But I would say by the time 2020 rolled around or COVID rolled around March 2020, I don't think that I was having any more conversations, messages, anything, any correspondence with Steve at all. So that's how that all came to be. And that's where we are on October 14th, 2021. One more thing, if you're wondering, being that the way Steve originally contacted me was through Patreon and being a Patreon supporter, did I ever give that money back to him? The answer is no. He was a Patreon supporter for 1 or 2 months. And that was it. I think as soon as I interviewed him, that was that. Maybe he thought that he needed to get on my good side, got more of my attention some way. And I know that he did this for other programs as well. And I think those people gave their money back. I did not. And the reason is that he gave that money of his own free will. And when people say, well, shouldn't you give that money back to him? Because I think it infers like I could be corrupted in some way. And I totally reject that. I find that thought disgusting. He did not pay his way onto the program. That is for sure. And even if had it been that way and he just emailed me, hey, I'm Steve Pankey and this would have been accused of, I still would have handled this entire situation the exact same way. It would not have changed at all. At all. So that's the way I look at it. Because I think in giving it back, it does kind of feel like to me, well, I just want to avoid all signs of impropriety or something. Well, I think that I've done that over the last 2 years of, I think, treating these circumstances since August of 2019 in the most honest and transparent way possible. So that's what I have to say to anybody who thinks that, well, if you don't give that money back, then that makes me look bad. I actually think it's the opposite. That this person, Steve, did support the program for a very short time, and still I have been very even-handed regarding all this. I think just shows that the money did not affect any of this in any way whatsoever. I would also say that the people who have given the money back to Steve, does that not infer that they think he is guilty, that money is bad money? Well, none of us know that. Because under that standard, anybody who is accused of anything, I guess, can never contribute to any program or anything, even a 501c3 or anything else, just because that person has been accused of something. And I don't think that's the way we really do things in the United States. We have to remember anybody is capable of anything at any time. At least that's the way I view human nature. And with Steve, just because he's been accused of something and because he is on trial does not make him any different than the rest of us for now. So we have to remember that. Really, if Steve is found not guilty, how are those people who gave his money back going to explain that? If he's found innocent, or in our system, not guilty, then I will keep the money. If he is found guilty, I will donate whatever he ended up paying through Patreon to my favorite charity, which will be Mary Lyle's, which I think is the most logical way to handle this. I'll leave the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.